Lord of Deception by Shadow_Delta. What if the villain wasn't just right but necessary? In a world where kingdoms bow to divine law and empires hide behind celestial mandates, one man dares to rewrite the script of fate itself. Kael was never the chosen one. He was the shadow behind the throne, the strategist behind the victories, the voice behind every betrayal. A man with no allegiance to gods, heroes, or prophecies, only to his own vision of a world unchained. Through manipulation, dominance, and psychological warfare, Kael dismantles empires, corrupts saviors, and seduces even the untouchable. From courtrooms soaked in blood to divine halls torn by philosophical war, Kael's rise is not paved by destiny but by design. As factions fire, heroes turn, empresses kneel, and even Archons, the divine arbiters of reality, begin to break under his logic. One question begins to echo across realms. Is Kael the villain who destroyed the world, or the mind that saved it from its own delusions? Lord of Deception is not just a dark fantasy, it's a political masterwork woven with cosmic ambition, complex character evolution, and a protagonist who is as terrifying as he is brilliant. With a growing cult following and a narrative arc spanning mortal politics to divine collapse, this is the kind of saga that leaves readers questioning every notion of right and wrong. Coming soon on the Yen. Join my Patreon for just $7. The Yen. Unlock instant access to over 100 audiobooks you won't find on YouTube, including exclusive and spicy stories that break the rules elsewhere. Yes. From immersive fiction to naughty novels that push the limits, this collection is updated regularly and always uncensored. No ads, no restrictions, just pure audio storytelling, the way it was meant to be heard. Section diaresis. For the price of a coffee, you're getting a full private library. Negation. Join now and start listening today. Patreon exclusive. Audiobook addict. Not on YouTube. Spicy reads. Adult fiction. Audiobook lovers. Veltharion did not sleep. It never had. Not in its 1,000 years of rising, nor in the centuries since it crowned kings atop blood-soaked thrones. The city breathed in smoke and ambition, coughed out steel and secrets. From the alabaster towers of the High Court to the gutters where the rats warred with desperate men, it thrummed with a pulse that defied silence. Its spires clawed at the heavens like the fingers of a dying god, wrapped in a blanket of mist that refused to lift. The skies above remained perpetually clouded, as if the very firmament recoiled from what lay beneath. The cobblestones below had forgotten sunlight. Gas lamps now reigned eternal, their orange glow flickering like tired stars. But tonight a broken bar, the pulse shifted. Not slower and quieter. The way a crowd stills before the first drop of blood. A collective inhale before the fire spreads. And if Veltharion held its breath tonight, it was for one name. In the bowels of the lower district, where law had long since starved and nobility no longer dared to tread, a cloaked figure moved like wind between the alleys. His boots made no sound. Not even the mangy dogs raised their heads as he passed. He did not hide. Kael had no need to. Shadows bent to him like obedient dogs, and the filth of the city parted before him, sensing a predator not born of this decay but elevated by it. He paused before a rusted iron gate that led into what was once a minor chapel to an old, forgotten god. A beggar slumped beside the gate, wrapped in a dozen layers of rags, his milky eyes staring into nothing or everything. Kael flicked a small copper token, a relic stamped with an image that hadn't existed on royal coinage for decades. The beggar caught it midair. The gate creaked open. Inside, the chapel had long forgotten the grace of divinity. Its wooden pews had rotted into dust. The mosaic of its central dome, once a depiction of the sky god ascending in flame, had collapsed inward, now a jagged wound in the ceiling that allowed moonlight to bleed through in pale shafts. The air smelled of cold stone, wax, old blood, and the type of secrets whispered only in absolution or blackmail. At the heart of the room stood an altar of black marble, fractured through the center like the city's soul. Around it, 12 figures stood cloaked in a ring of flickering candles. They were not priests. A merchant prince draped in midnight silks and heavy jewels that glittered like bribes. A disgraced general, his face marked by war and failure, an eye replaced with a polished obsidian stone. 2 noblers, one from House Renville, known for its silver mines and vicious duels. Another from House Oslin, a family renowned for public piety and private scandal. Others, spies, bankers, smugglers, and a former high curate whose faith had withered into ambition. At the altar's head stood Kael, wrapped in silence. He let it sit. Let them squirm. Let them question who else was summoned. Let their nerves fester under the weight of unspoken truths. Silence was a blade if wielded right, when Kael was a master of every weapon. When he finally spoke, it was with the precision of a man who understood the weight of each syllable. The king believes this city is his. That divine right and ancient bloodlines will preserve his crown. That tradition is stronger than decay. His eyes moved across each figure. Pale grey ear, too cold to be silver, too warm to be steel. He is wrong. The merchant shifted, his bejeweled fingers tightening. The general's one eye narrowed. The noble from House Oslin opened his mouth, uncertain. Lord Kael, to question the crown Isa. Not what I've done, Kael said, calm and sharp. We are not rebels. We are architects. He stepped forward and placed a ring on the altar. Black, flawless, save for the blood-red script etched along its surface, letters older than the empire, forgotten even by scholars. We don't break thrones, we hollow them. A silence followed, deeper than before. The weight of it thickened the air. We sow doubt, Kael continued. We turn loyal nobles into opportunists. Opportunists into agents. We turn faith into currency. The king doesn't need to fall. He just needs to be outlived. One of the younger merchants, barely past 20, reeking of perfume and fear, raised his voice. And a broken bar, the queen? Kael stopped, smiled. Serafina is a different kind of creature. She understands power. She watches. She waits. A broken bar, she calculates. Let her believe she still has time. Far above, in the imperial palace of white marble and golden damask, a broken bar. Queen Serafina stood before a mirror of silver glass. The reflection that stared back was not just beauty but poise, and intellect sharpened to a knife's edge. Her chamber was quiet. Only the wind rustled the scarlet drapes. A fire crackled in the hearth. Behind her, a cloaked man knelt. He moves through the lower districts, the spy whispered. The old families, the forgotten ones. He speaks to them. And yet, he doesn't touch the throne, Serafina murmured, eyes locked with her own reflection. No, but they follow him. She turned, moving to the arched window that overlooked Veltharian sprawl. Below, the veins of the city pulsed with dim light, like some giant beast dreaming restlessly. Men like Kael don't seize power, she said softly. They let it come to them. She sipped from a glass of deep red wine. Her voice cooled further. Watch him, do not act. When he shows his hand a broken bar, I'll decide whether to shake it or sever it. Back in the chapel, the meeting neared its end. Kael's voice lowered, each word deliberate. House Oslina, you'll begin whispering of the crown's failed reforms. Leak falsified reports. Question the legitimacy of their taxes. General Myth, he said, turning to the one-eyed veteran. I want those sealed war records from the siege of Andor. The truth about the king's betrayal of the southern garrisons. Merchants, he added, turning to the silk-draped figures, increase prices in regions where the faith's grip is strongest. Let hunger whisper treason. In the shadows of the doorway leaned a figure wrapped in grey leather. Mercia, his whisper blade. Kael's voice softened. Remind the high priest of Viren what his silence cost him. Mercia inclined her head. A heartbeat later, she was gone, disappearing into the dark with a whisper of steel. One by one, the others followed, slipping into the veins of Veltharian like poison in blood. Hours later, Kael stood alone atop the chapel's spire. Wind whipped around him. His cloak fluttered like smoke. The city sprawled before him, endless, alive, and utterly unaware of the fire kindling beneath its skin. The stars above hid behind thick clouds, but Kael didn't need them. He could see, he could feel it. The tension in the stone, the hunger in the people, the rot in the crown, the first fracture in the old world. He closed his eyes and felt the ember spark. The first ember has been lit, he murmured, voice carried by the wind. Let the fire begin. The throne room of the imperial palace was a cathedral of control. Every arch and column carved to remind those within of their place. Light poured through stained glass like judgment from above, painting the white marble in holy colors that only masked the decay beneath. Here, legacy lingered like perfumey sweet, suffocating, and obsolete. Emperor Castiel sat upon the throne of ivory and obsidian, his robes immaculate, his crown heavy with forgotten victories. He held his posture like a man clinging to relevance, his fingers resting idly on the hilt of a ceremonial blade no longer drawn in battle. Before him, the nobility knelt a rows of trembling loyalty wrapped in velvet and fear. All but one, clad in black, his silhouette cut through the chamber like a wound. He stood as though the throne behind him was already his, as though the Empire had merely forgotten to crown him. "You stand while others kneel," Kael remarked, voice calm, though the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "You've grown bold." Kael's smile was faint, deliberate. "I've grown useful, Your Majesty." Boldness is merely how the court interprets efficiency. A few nobles chuckled, then stopped quickly. Humor was dangerous here, especially if not shared by the Emperor. Kael leaned forward. "Useful, are you? And what usefulness does a man like you provide, when loyalty is so broken bar fluid?" Kael's eyes swept the chamber, then returned to the throne. "Loyalty is a reflection of stability. If your court falters, if your people seek alternative voices, perhaps they no longer hear yours." A silence fell as sharp as shattered glass. The challenge was unspoken and undeniable. Kael's fingers tapped once, twice, on the throne's arm. "You speak like a man with solutions. Let's hear one." Kael's tone shifted, no longer defensive, but surgical. "The rebellion in the West is not your enemy. It's theater designed to draw your gaze while the real battle unfolds here." "In my court?" Kael asked, amused. "In your shadows," Kael replied. "The church, the merchant guilds, the disenfranchised houses, they're not isolated threats. They're threads of the same noose." "The church?" The Emperor's voice dropped, now more curious than affronted. Kael nodded. "They bless heroes, not crowns. They anoint symbols, not rulers. And symbols are dangerous things. They do not answer to kings, so they replace them." The word hung in the air like a sword suspended above the throne. "Do you mean the hero?" Kael asked at last. Kael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward and lowered his voice, just enough for the court to lean in. "A sword blessed by gods is still just a sword. A broken bar and swords, Your Majesty, can be turned." The implications rippled through the court like a tremor before the quake. "Blasphemy, treason, or strategy?" Kael studied him. "You would turn the hero?" Kael smiled at just enough to be maddening. "I would redefine him." That night, beneath painted skies and whispered secrets, Lady Eveline stood on her balcony overlooking the lantern-lit gardens of the inner palace. Wind played with her silk robes, but her gaze was still, her mind sharper than any blade Kael had drawn. "You speak of turning champions and defying gods," she said without turning. "You tempt wrath wrapped in prophecy." Kael stepped beside her, his presence calm. "Inevitable. Wrath is loud," he replied. "Loud is clumsy, and clumsy is predictable." She finally looked at him. "And the Empress?" Kael's lips curved. "Serafina sees the Emperor for what he is, an echo. She waits not for a usurper, but for a replacement. One who doesn't take power a broken bar but earns gravity." Their eyes met. Understanding passed between them like a torch exchanged in a darkened corridor. Not affection, not desire, strategy. Elsewhere, beneath the cathedral vaults of Viren's faith, in the crypt sealed from the Empire's light, three figures stood cloaked in ritual white. The candles burned blue. "The serpent moves quickly," one muttered. "His words infect the court like rot." The nobles bent toward him, another said, voice laced with venom. "Even the merchants whisper his name in reverence." "He does not challenge openly," the third whispered. "He poisons." Patiently. "What of the hero?" the first asked. "Shall we summon him, publicly? Restore the people's faith with spectacle?" "And if he fails?" came the quiet reply. The silence that followed was not indecision, it was fear. For if the hero fell by scandal, steal, or subversion of the church would not merely lose influence, it would lose meaning. Far above, hidden in the layers of the imperial dusk, Kael watched candlelight flicker across the palace walls like omens written in flame. His whisper blade, Mercia, stood beside him, silent. "They'll bring him forward soon," she said. "The hero." Kael's eyes didn't leave the palace. "Good. You'll face him." "I'll shape him," Kael said. Below, The city breathed. Unaware, unprepared. But not for long. The shadows beneath the throne were growing longer. And Kael was no longer content to walk among them. He was ready to rule from within them. The imperial ballroom was a masterpiece of deception. A gold-veined marble floors, crystalline chandeliers that refracted starlight through painted glass, and music so elegant it almost drowned out the rot beneath the empire's skin. Almost. It was not a celebration, it was theater. Every smile was sharpened, every gesture rehearsed. Nobles drank wine like poison and traded pleasantries like blades. The empire's most powerful men and women gathered not for unity but to weigh threats, forge alliances, and quietly prepare for war. Every step was calculated, every movement rehearsed behind layers of etiquette. The empire was a corpse painted, perfumed, and paraded. And into that curated storm walked Kael. No sigil adorned his black attire. No family crest announced his name. But the crowd shifted around him regardless, a silent acknowledgement of gravity no one wished to challenge. He did not walk with pomp or arrogance, but with purpose, like a dagger unsheathed in a room of dancers. He moved like a shadow given form, a measured, composed, inevitable. Eyes found him. Women lingered. Men flinched. Not because of what he had done, but because of what he might. Kael was the kind of man who bent fate around his will, who made kings into footnotes, and from above, hidden behind jeweled fans and diplomatic detachment, the Empress watched. Lady Eveline joined him, her crimson silk swirling like fire around her. The daughter of a disgraced house, Eveline had clawed her way back into courtly relevancy and now stood as Kael's closest ally. She leaned close, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. "You're drawing too many eyes." "I want them to look," Kael murmured, his eyes scanning the room without flinching. "But not to see." Her smile was quick, sharp. "And the Empress?" Kael's gaze flicked upward to the throne balcony, where Valeria sat beside her emperor, her fan hiding everything but her gaze. She was watching him. Not idly, not politely, like a tactician measuring terrain before conquest. "She'll come," Kael said. And as if summoned, the music changed. Soft strings gave way to an imperial waltzer, the kind that demanded attention. All movement stilled as Valeria rose. Empresses did not descend during political dances. Not without cause. Not without declaration. When she stepped down the marble stairs, time folded around her. Each step was poised, imperial, deliberate. A storm wrapped in sapphire and shadow. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. This was no gesture. This was warpaint. She approached him as if she were offering a crown. "Lord Kael," she said, extending her gloved hand. "Dance with me." The silence was instant and absolute. Kael bowed, slow and precise. When he took her hand, the air itself seemed to shift. And the empire held its breath. They danced like predators, each turn a threat, each step a challenge. To the crowd, it was elegance. To them, it was diplomacy veiled in danger. "You're dangerous," Valeria whispered, barely moving her lips. "You whisper revolutions into men's ears and let them believe it was their idea." Kael's expression didn't shift. "Ideas are wind. I merely set the sails." She arched an eyebrow. "And emperors? What do you do with them?" "Some become driftwood. Some are broken bar fuel." Her smile didn't waver, but her grip tightened slightly. "You court destruction. Number. I prepare for it. The empire is a crumbling tower. I'm just choosing where the stones will fall." "You speak like a man without fear." Kael's eyes met hers, cold and clear. "Fear implies consequence. I prefer inevitability." Her fan dipped ever so slightly. "You remind me of him," she murmured. "Your emperor?" She laughed, soft and humorless. "Number. My father. The last man who tried to tame the court without bleeding for it." "And did he?" "He drowned in politics and wine." "You, however, a broken bar. You walk like someone who's already survived drowning." The music swelled. They spun closer, tighter. "You've shaken the court," she whispered. "But you've not yet faced the true blood beneath the stone." "Not yet," Kael said. "But I know it's sent." She leaned in, her lips grazing his ear. "If you want the throne, Kael, a broken bar, you'll have to take it from both of us." And just like that, she pulled away, leaving him standing alone. Applause followed her as she returned to the emperor's side. But she never looked back. She didn't need to. Kael exhaled slowly, though his pulse had never risen. Around him, murmurs began like wildfire, questions, theories, speculations. Eveline appeared beside him again. That wasn't a dance, she murmured. No, Kael said. It was a warning. She's more dangerous than the Emperor, Eveline said. She's the mind, Kael replied. He's just the mask. Later that night, on the terrace above the ballroom, Kael stood beneath a silver sky. The city below flickered with firelight and false peace. In the distance, the bells of the south ward tolled midnight. Eveline joined him once more, cloak drawn against the wind. She'll move against you. She already has, Kael said. Tonight was her opening gambit. Why provoke her? Eveline's voice was quiet now. You could have played safer, slower. I don't need time, Kael replied. I need leverage. And what did you gain? He turned to her. Her attention. That's not leverage, Eveline said. Kael's smile was thin. Not yet. Far beneath the palace, in the sanctified decay of the church's inner sanctum, 3 bishops stood in flickering candlelight. Smoke curled from censers. The statues of long-forgotten saints loomed, their faces eaten by centuries of soot. She danced with him, one said, voice dry as paper. She acknowledged him, another hissed. In front of everyone. If he turns her, the empire falls. Then he act. They placed a scroll upon the altar, sealed in black wax. The mark upon it was ancient, older than the empire itself, the mark of divine summoning. The hero must return. They prayed in fractured Latin, but none of them noticed that the seal had already been cracked, not from outside, from within. The summoning had begun, and Kael had written its ending. The sky above it near cracked with thunder. Not yet rain, only pressure. The kind that made men restless and gods silent. The storm was waiting, coiled above the city like a predator. Within the towering sanctum of light, the grand cathedral that pierced the clouds above the holy district, priests and disciples knelt in solemn prayer. Candles lined the marble floor, their flames trembling in the rising wind seeping through stained glass windows. But the prayers tonight were not of peace. They were of fear. Because he had returned, and he was not the same. The massive sanctum doors, carved from celestial oak and bound in gold, creaked open with the weight of prophecy. The sound echoed through the cathedral like judgment. Footsteps followed, heavy, slow, measured. Not by exhaustion, but purpose. And then he appeared, clad in radiant silver armor tarnished by ash and blood, etched with fading glyphs once vibrant with divine power. His golden blonde hair, once gleaming like dawn, now fell in damp strands across his brow. His face bore the chisel of heroism, but the glow that had once set it alight was gone. The hero of light had come back from the abyss. But something holy in him was missing. Something sacred had died. High Priest Gregorin rose from the altar, his white and gold robes trailing behind him like wings. Blessed be the flame that brought you home, chosen blade. The priests echoed softly, blessed be the flame. A broken bar. Aaron's gaze swept over Thema, once his brethren, his faith, his tether. Now they looked like porcelain masks lined in fear. His voice answered with the weight of a tombstone. The flame flickers. His words struck with more force than any sword. The air turned brittle. A few younger acolytes bowed lower, their faith shaken by the hollowness in his tone. Gregorin did not flinch. He stepped forward, smiling with rehearsed serenity. You have returned at the hour we need you most. The empire fractures. Heresy rises. A shadow moves behind the throne. We must have a symbol, a pawn, Aaron interrupted. The word rang through the cathedral like a bell of judgment. Silence. Then whispers. Unspoken heresies filled the air like smoke. Gregorin narrowed his eyes. We all serve in the war between light and darkness. Even kings, even heroes. Aaron stepped forward slowly, each movement like a hammer blow on sacred ground. I walked the paths no man dares. I entered the void at your bidding. I fought monsters beyond nightmare. A broken bar, and all for what? You were chosen, Gregorin said firmly. No, Aaron said, voice cold. I was used. Lightning flashed through the stained glass. For a moment, every face was bathed in color, red, blue, gold, and then darkness returned. You saw things, Gregorin said carefully. But you are not forsaken. The gods are. Don't speak of them. Aaron's voice cut like a blade. They speak, yes, but only in riddles, only in silence. When I cried out for salvation, they offered silence. And now you ask me to bleed again for a cause already stained with rot. Gregorin looked at him not with anger but disappointment. The worst kind. You were our hope, Archon turned away. Then you never truly knew me. Far beneath the sanctum, in the catacombs where only the most privileged prayers were whispered, Eveline stood before Kael in the flickering light of enchanted lanterns. A sealed scroll lay between them, fresh from the holy spire. "He's different," she whispered. "Even the high priests are unsure." He refused their blessing. Would not kneel. Kael leaned forward, resting his fingers on the rim of a wine glass filled with obsidian red liquid. "Did he speak of me?" "Number. But he will." She hesitated, then added, "The divine sigils on his armor are fading. He's either losing the gods a broken bar or discarding them." Kael smirked. "Good. Doubt is the seed. Once it's planted, it blooms into loyalty. Not to gods a broken bar, but to you," Eveline finished. She studied him for a beat. "He's still powerful, dangerous." "Yes, and broken things a broken bar are easier to reshape." Outside, thunder cracked once more. The rain had begun. Archon stood alone in the Garden of Trials, where once he had trained beside divine avatars and relics of the first flame. Now, the statues of long-dead saints looked down on him with cracked faces and empty eyes. His sword lay beside him on the marble benches, still gleaming, still perfect. He hadn't touched it since his return. "What am I now?" he whispered. The silence stretched thick and patient. Then, a voice, not divine, not demonic, his own. "You are the blade, and blades do not choose. They are wielded." Archon looked up. Perched on the edge of the stone wall above him was a raven, its feathers blacker than night, glistening like ink in the stormlight. Its eyes burned with an unnatural crimson glow. Not divine, not holy. A message, a warning, or an invitation. And Archon did not look away. Back within the palace, the Empress stood in a forgotten wing sealed since the last imperial purge. Before her was a massive mirror shrouded in silken veils. Not a simple-looking glass, but a relic. One older than the Empire. She whispered an incantation. The veil dissolved. The mirror shimmered, showing not her reflection but visions. Archon's return. The sanctuaries tremble. Kael's ascendance. And something older, darker shifting beneath the surface of the world. Behind her, a cloaked figure stepped from the shadows. A voice like falling ash spoke. "He questions. He seeks answers where there are none." The Empress turned. "And Kael?" "He is the question." She nodded slowly, her fingers brushing the mirror's edge. "The hero will not save the Empire this time." "No," the shadowed figure replied. "He will destroy it." In the city below, whispers grew. The people rejoiced at the hero's return, unaware of the storm within him. Children sang songs of the chosen blade, while merchants sold charms etched with his sigil. But in darker corners assassins, cults, and spies moved with purpose. Some planned to use him, others planned to end him. And Kael planned to turn the hero into his greatest tool or his greatest weapon. But not yet. Not until the flame within him flickered out completely. And Kael would be there when it did. The ballroom of House of Varmont glittered with golden chandeliers and velvet masks. The high ceiling was adorned with intricate frescoes depicting mythic battles and divine heroes, their faces lost in the shadows of the glittering jewels and glimmering candlelight. It was a room made for spectacle, where power dressed in finery, and ambition was cloaked in silk. Laughter rang out, though the sound was sharp and artificial, more a nervous release than true joy. Wine flowed like blood in goblets held by trembling hands, red and gold swirling like liquid fire under the crystal chandeliers. But beneath the music and lace, everyone knew the truth. This wasn't a party. It was a war of glances, of whispered promises, of poisoned favors wrapped in silken smiles, a war where nothing was as it seemed. And at its center stood the man who did not belong. He wore a simple black mask, unadorned, modest, anonymous. Yet, in a room full of masks designed to hide and deceive, Kael's stood out in its stark simplicity. It was a deliberate choice here: no glittering jewels, no intricate designs, just pure black, an enigma among the ornate, his anonymity a weapon as dangerous as any blade. And yet, despite his plain appearance, he was the most dangerous figure in the room. His eyes cut through the crowd like a predator's gaze, assessing each noble, each whisper, each movement. The power of a man who wasn't just in the room, but who owned it, played out with every step he took. Dukes eyed him from behind jeweled veils. Their eyes, sharp and calculating, took in his every movement, evaluating, deciding. Every noble in the room could feel the weight of his presence, the tension in the air as palpable as the thick velvet drapes. Some saw Kael as a threat, others a means to an end, and a few as an opportunity or a game of chance they couldn't afford to ignore. Countesses whispered his name like a curtsy broken by or a prayer. "That's him," one noble murmured, voice trembling behind her feathered disguise. "The man who silenced Lord Grover with a letter. The man who made the Empress listen." The rumors surrounding Kael had spread like wildfire across the empire. No one knew exactly who he was or where he came from. But one thing was certain: Kael was a force to be reckoned with. He wasn't a noble by birth, not a prince or a lord, but he had the power of a king nonetheless. Kael moved through the room like a shadow. Every step was measured, calculated, precise. He made no effort to stand out, yet his presence swallowed everything around him. Every nod, every word, every gesture was deliberate. He was not here to be seen. He was here to see. The ball was not a celebration, it was a chessboard, and Kael was the Grand Master. His hand brushed against the back of a chair as he passed, deliberately close. The noblewoman seated there stiffened, her pulse quickening. She glanced over at him, only to find his gaze already on her. A brief flicker of recognition, of fear, perhaps, or admiration before she quickly looked away, her face turning crimson under the heat of the room. Evelyn appeared at his side, her midnight phoenix mask glinting in the light, her presence magnetic and deliberate. She was his closest ally and a weapon in her own right, as skilled in manipulation as Kael himself. "The Vira Monter is watching you," she said, her voice a low murmur in his ear, her eyes scanning the room. "He's nervous." "He should be," Kael replied, his tone even. He raised his glass to his lips, the red wine swirling inside. He did not drink it, he never did. The act of drinking was a performance, a way to put on a show of normalcy. "By the end of the night, he'll beg for my protection." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, a soft smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "And the Baroness?" "She'll offer herself to me before the music ends," Kael said with a quiet certainty. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the Baroness, who stood by the grand staircase, her laughter a little too loud, her flirtations a little too exaggerated. It was clear she had already chosen her side. "And the hero?" Evelyn asked, her voice taking on a more serious tone. Kael's gaze shifted upward, toward the grand balcony that overlooked the ballroom. There, standing like a statue of light, was Archon, clad in ceremonial silver, his armor shining like a beacon in the dim glow of the chandeliers. He was polished, perfecto, an image of what a hero should be. And yet, there was something else in his posture, something that did not belong, something that spoke of a soul fractured, of a mind struggling with the weight of its purpose. Archon watched the masquerade unfold, his hands clenched around the marble rail as if it were the only thing anchoring him to this world. His sharp blue eyes darted across the room, scanning the revelers below, but there was no joy in his gaze. There was no recognition of the party, no connection to the dance. None of them knew the truth. Not the priests who praised him, not the nobles who feared him, not even the people who once loved him. Archon had killed in the name of faith. He had slaughtered, burned, and bled for the gods he had once revered. And now, that faith, the very thing that had given him purpose, had begun to slip through his fingers like sand. His certainty was crumbling, and in its place, doubt was taking root. Kael, meanwhile, stood below like a phantom from the underworld, weaving loyalty and fear with a mere flick of his hand. He did not need to speak to command attention, his mere presence spoke volumes. Every noble knew that Kael's influence extended far beyond the walls of this ballroom. They felt the weight of it, pressing down on them like a silent storm. Archon's jaw clenched as he watched Kael's every move, the uncertainty in his heart growing with every second. The whispers that had followed Kael's rise were all true. He was dangerous. But there was more to it than that. Kael was a mirror, a reflection of the very thing Archon had once been, but now could never be again. Archon turned away from the balcony, his thoughts racing. If Kael was the spider, then Archon was the fly caught in the web. "What are you?" Archon whispered under his breath, his voice barely audible. "A man, or a mirror?" Kael did not answer. He didn't need to. The sound of heels clicking on the marble floor broke the silence as Kael turned his attention back to the Duchess of Lizara, who stood at the edge of the crowd, her crimson mask only partially obscuring her sharp eyes. She was a woman of great beauty and greater ambition. Kael had seen that look in her eyes before, the hunger for power, the need for protection, the desire to be seen as more than just a decorative piece in the Empire's court. "You look troubled, Your Grace," Kael said gently, his voice soft but penetrating. He approached her slowly, his steps measured. "What weighs on your mind?" Her gaze flickered to him, then quickly dropped to the floor. She didn't want to be seen speaking to him. In a room full of predators, associating with Kael was a dangerous game. But the threat in his voice, the weight of his presence, made it impossible for her to walk away. "My estate is threatened," she confessed in a low voice, her hands tightening around her glass. "Bandits along the coast." "No support from the crown." Kael studied her for a moment. The lie was clear in her words, and no support from the crown was a half-truth, meant to mask her deeper desperation. She wasn't just facing a few bandits. She was losing her influence, her wealth, and perhaps even her standing in the court. He reached forward, placing a hand over hers, his touch light but firm. "Unacceptable," he said, his voice laced with an assurance that held an unspoken promise. "The Empire cannot afford to lose beauty or loyalty." Her breath hitched, her eyes widening as she realized what he was offering. Protection, power, an alliance that would secure her place in the Empire. "But at what cost?" "I'll send men tomorrow," Kael continued, his voice low, a promise laced with subtle threat. "Your enemies will be dealt with swiftly." The Duchess blinked, taken aback by the speed of his offer. "You would?" Kael's smile was all calculated charm. "The Empire cannot afford to lose beauty or loyalty." Her eyes glimmered, and Kael saw it. He had her. Later, as the music swelled, Eveline returned to Kael's side, her steps purposeful as she leaned in close. "Two offers of alliance, 3 desperate favors, a spy exposed, and a secret letter from the Empress herself," she reported with a gleam of satisfaction. Kael listened, his gaze sweeping the room as he processed the information. Everything was falling into place. Each piece was being moved exactly where he wanted it. "Good," Kael said, his voice calm, almost detached. "What of Aron?" Eveline's voice dropped to a whisper. "He hasn't moved. But he's watching. He knows you're a threat." Kael's lips curled into a faint smile. "No," he said, his voice tinged with a quiet confidence. "He thinks I'm a threat. I want him to believe that." "Why?" Kael's smile deepened, but there was no warmth in it. "Because paranoia eats faster than poison." The hero turned from the balcony. He had made his decision. If Kael was the spider, then Aron would burn the web. Even if it meant burning himself with it. The moon hung like a pale omen above the holy citadel, its cold light casting jagged shadows across the stone spires. The entire city, wrapped in the stillness of night, seemed to breathe a quiet, anxious sigh. In the heart of the citadel, inside the sanctum, a place usually reserved for prayer and reflection, Aron knelt on the cold marble floor. His once glorious armor, radiant and divine, now seemed heavier with every breath he took. The gauntlets, once a symbol of strength and righteousness, now felt like shackles binding him to a reality he could not escape. Bloodstains marred the polished surface of his gloves, remnants from the events earlier that day. His eyes were distant, haunted. He had once been the object of worship. Children had reached for his hand, widows had offered prayers of gratitude for the vengeance he brought upon demons. Priests had proclaimed him chosen by the gods, a shining beacon of hope in an empire that had long since lost its way. But now a broken bar. "They screamed my name," Aron whispered into the stillness, his voice hoarse, barely audible. "Not in praise, in fear." He clenched his fists tightly, feeling the weight of his identity slipping further from his grasp. The crowd had once adored him. They had placed him upon a pedestal, crowned him with their unshakable faith. Yet now, after the ritual of the blood, the prayers twisted into incantations of darkness. He had become something else. Something monstrous. The sacred image of the hero had cracked, splintering like fragile glass under the pressure of doubt and betrayal. The echoes of the crowd's fearful murmurs still lingered in his ears. Heretic. The word had burned through him, slicing deeper than any sword. Even the faithful of those who had once hailed him as their divine savior had flinched as he passed. His very presence was now met with mistrust and fear. The hero had become the villain, and worse still, He felt it. Felt the shift in his own heart. The light that once shone so brightly had dimmed. No matter how hard he tried, he could not seem to grasp it again. It was gone. "They see weakness," came the voice of High Priest Gregorin, slicing through his thoughts. The priest paced before the altar, his robes trailing like the chains of a prisoner. "We cannot afford hesitation, Aaron. If you falter now, if you show them any more weakness, you will lose everything." Aaron rose slowly, his head pounding with the weight of the priest's words. The man was right, of course. The world saw him as a monster now. And yet, in his heart, he knew he had done nothing but follow the will of the gods. Or so he had been told. "I didn't hesitate," Aaron snapped, his voice rising with frustration. He clenched his fists, feeling the tremble of exhaustion in his bones. "I did what was right. What the gods demanded." Gregorin's eyes glinted with something darker, amusement or contempt. It was hard to tell. The priest's thin lips curled into a smile. "Then why does the world see you as a monster, Aaron? Why does the crowd cheer for your enemy's name in the halls of power, when they once hailed yours?" Aaron growled, the name slipping from his tongue like poison. The mere mention of the man who had been the architect of his downfall was enough to send a shiver down his spine. Gregorin nodded, his smile widening. "Yes, he has shattered your image, Aaron. He knows how to wield power, how to manipulate the shadows, how to make a hero crumble, and the people listen to him. Not you." Aaron's jaw clenched, a mixture of rage and helplessness flooding his veins. "Then I'll kill him," he said, the words coming out in a low, deadly tone. His grip tightened on the hilt of his sword. Kael had made a fool of him, humiliated him before the very people who had once adored him. The need for vengeance surged in Aaron's chest like a burning wildfire. He would not let Kael walk free. Gregorin's eyes darkened, his voice a low whisper. "You'll try," he said, a note of amusement laced in his words. "But understand this, Arona, if you fail a broken bar, the gods will abandon us both." The weight of those words pressed down on Aaron like an anvil. He stared at Gregorin, his hands trembling, though he could not tell whether it was from rage or fear. The priest was right. Aaron had fought battles against demons, against monsters, but this was different. This was not just a fight for survival. This was a battle for his soul. Far from the citadel, in the dimly lit halls of the Imperial Library, Kael stood before an ancient tapestry. The intricate artwork depicted a forgotten war, a celestial battle between angels and abyssal beasts. The tapestry shimmered in the candlelight, its threads shimmering like the blood of fallen gods. Kael traced his fingers over the image of a winged angel with a sword raised high, cleaving through the darkness. Eveline entered the chamber behind him, holding 2 sealed letters in her hands. She handed them to him without a word, and Kael accepted them, his gaze never leaving the tapestry. "From House Caldrith and Duke Merrow," she said, her voice low. "Both are willing to pull funding from the church." Quietly, of course. Kael read the letters with a detached expression, his mind working faster than his eyes could move across the parchment. "The hero is fracturing," he said, his voice calm, though there was a hint of something darker in his tone. "How soon before he breaks completely?" Eveline's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "He's already broken. He just doesn't realize it yet." Kael's eyes darkened as he placed the letters down on the stone table. He reached up, tracing a sigil on the tapestry. A halo cracked down the center, its light flickering. The symbol was a perfect metaphor for Aaron's fall. "No," Kael said, his voice as cold as steel. "Not yet." "But he will." He stepped back from the tapestry, his gaze lingering on the shattered image of the angel. "Faith is like glass, Eveline," Kael said, his voice low. "Once it shatters, no one remembers what it used to reflect, only what it failed to protect." Later that evening, in the Undercity of Firemont, Kael walked alone into a defiled shrine. The walls were smeared with ash and blood, remnants of rituals long abandoned. In the center of the shrine stood an old priest, bent with age and blindness. Despite his frailty, the priest turned to Kael without hesitation. "You again," the old man rasped, his voice dry as dust. "You smell of shadows, boy." "And you smell of rot, old man," Kael replied, his voice calm, almost affectionate. He crossed the threshold of the shrine, stepping lightly on the cracked stone floor. "But we both know that rot is where truth grows." Kael placed a pouch of coins on the altar, the sound of the metal clinking breaking the silence. The priest did not flinch. "Spread the word," Kael instructed, his voice sharp. "Quietly tell them that the hero bleeds guilt, that his sword shakes when it strikes." The priest grinned, toothless, his smile a grotesque thing in the dim light. "And the price?" he asked, his voice full of gravel. Kael's eyes hardened. "Just one rumor, that he questioned the will of the gods." The priest chuckled darkly. "A lie, then?" Kael's smile was cold, cruel. "Does it matter?" Back at the holy citadel, Archon sat alone in his sanctum, his mind a storm of doubt. The weight of his decision, the words of the crowd, the whispers of the gods, they all circled in his mind like vultures. The reflection in the polished steel of his sword was not that of the hero who had once slain demons in the name of righteousness. No, it was a man lost in a storm of doubts. A man who had failed to live up to the image of the divine that had been thrust upon him. "You're doubting," he whispered to himself. The words like daggers in his mind. "You hesitated. You faltered." Archon gripped his sword tighter, his knuckles white with tension. He had been the chosen one. He had been the sword of the gods. And yet a broken bar. Now the very gods seemed to turn their faces from him. The light that had once burned so brightly now flickered, weak and uncertain. Kael had done this. Kael had brought him to this point, shattered the image he had built for years. And now a broken bar, he was left with nothing but doubt. Back in the imperial palace, Kael stood before the empress, his presence as cold as ever. She looked at him with a mixture of fascination and wariness, her eyes hiding 1,000 thoughts behind a veil of carefully constructed masks. "The hero is wounded," she said, her voice like silk, but with an edge. "And yet a broken bar." "You smile." Kael's lips curved into a thin, knowing smile. "Because a wounded icon is far more useful than a perfect one," he replied, his voice low, filled with a dark promise. The empress raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what would you do, Kael? Replace him?" "No," Kael said, his eyes gleaming with cold certainty. "I would own him." The grand cathedral of Viremont loomed over the city like a sentinel, its white marble spires piercing the sky in a breathtaking display of religious devotion. The architecture was a testament to the church's dominion over the land, each stone laid with purpose, as if to remind the world that the divine hand guided all beneath it. The cathedral was a place of absolute certainty, a sanctuary for the faithful where the word of the gods was unchallenged, immutable. The scent of incense clung to the air, thick and sweet, mingling with the subtle hum of prayer that vibrated from every corner. It was the center of the empire's faith, the wellspring of spiritual purity. But beneath the cold surface of its unyielding stone, something trembled. A subtle, almost imperceptible vibration in the air, the kind of shift that occurs when the winds of change begin to stir, unseen but undeniable. Lady Elendra stood at the altar, her figure cloaked in silver armor that gleamed in the light of the stained glass windows. The rays from the setting sun cast fractured patterns across her as she hesitated, staring at the golden cross that hung above the altar. Her hands, normally steady, trembled ever so slightly, the cold metal of her gauntlets a reminder of her position, a knight sworn to defend the truth, whatever it may be. But today, that truth was slipping through her fingers. The words of the high priest echoed in her mind, a relentless refrain that seemed to bounce off the cathedral's cold walls, reverberating in her skull. The morning service had been unyielding in its demand. "You will speak against the traitors. Condemn them by name." Among them. She squeezed her eyes shut, as if to block out the reverberating command. "Condemn him?" The weight of the decision pressed heavily on her chest. The man who had once saved her life. The man who had stood beside her as the shining blade of the light, slicing through the darkness. She had trusted him with her life. She had believed in his cause. And yet a broken bar. Here she stood, faced with the unbearable possibility that he might be the very thing the church accused him of being, a heretic, a traitor. The name echoed in her mind, a whisper that had never truly faded, no matter how much she tried to bury it. His sharp mind, his calculated words, his ability to manipulate not just the battlefield but the hearts of those around him. He was a strategist, a serpent in the court, the kind of man who could make silence scream, who could carve paths where none existed. And yet a broken bar. He had never lied to her. Not once. It was this unyielding certainty that made her question everything. Because now, as the sun set over Viremont, She stood at the threshold of a decision that would reshape everything. Across the city, in a tower bathed in shadows, Kael sat before an obsidian mirror, his reflection twisted in the dark glass. He did not look at his own face. Instead, the mirror reflected the face of Lady Elendra, her features fragmented, distorted by the ripples in the glass. He was watching her, always watching her. He knew what she was feeling before she even realized it herself. Eveline, standing at the edge of the room with her arms crossed, watched him closely. Her dark eyes never left his, even as the flames from the nearby brazier flickered and cast dancing shadows across the stone floor. "What will she choose?" Eveline asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and a hint of amusement. Kael's lips curved upward, though there was no warmth in the gesture. He did not need to answer immediately. His eyes, however, never left the mirror. The reflection of Elendra's troubled face seemed to pull at him like a string, tugging at something deep inside him. "She's already chosen," Kael murmured, his voice low and certain. "She just doesn't know it yet." Eveline raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "You truly believe she'll side with you?" "I don't need her to side with me," Kael replied, turning away from the mirror. "I just need her to doubt." He stood, his movements fluid and precise, like a predator preparing to strike. He walked toward the window, his gaze sweeping across the city below. The streets were quiet, the air heavy with tension. The church's grip on the people was slipping, and Kael could feel it in the very fabric of the city. Doubt was in the air like a poison, and it was spreading. "Doubt is the leash. Guilt is the chain," he continued, his voice steady. "And I've wrapped them both around her soul." Eveline did not respond immediately. She only watched him, waiting for him to elaborate. "She's a pawn," Kael said, almost to himself. "But all pawns have a breaking point. And once that point is reached, they'll either break a broken bar or they'll see the truth." He turned back to Eveline, his eyes gleaming with cold certainty. "And Elendra will see the truth, whether she wants to or not." The afternoon sun cast a dim glow across Vermont as Lady Elendra walked through the streets of the city, her figure hidden beneath a plain, unremarkable cloak. She had to leave the cathedral, had to leave the oppressive weight of it behind, if only for a moment. She needed space to think, to breathe. Vermont was supposed to be a city of faith, of loyalty, of unwavering devotion. But as Elendra walked through its narrow streets, she saw the cracks forming, the subtle signs that all was not well. The first sign came in the form of graffiti, spray-painted across the base of a once sacred statue of a saint. The words were crude, hastily written but unmistakable. "The hero is the heretic." Her breath caught in her throat. The hero, Archon, the one the church had claimed to be the divine instrument of salvation. But now a broken bar. Now they called him a heretic. She could feel her heart beat faster, her pulse quickening as a sense of dread began to settle deep in her chest. Her footsteps quickened, but the whispers of the crowd did not escape her. They grew louder, more insistent, as if the very air was thick with suspicion. "They say the executions were rigged," a merchant muttered to a customer. "That the church paid those heretics to die." The words struck her like a physical blow. The thought that the church might have orchestrated the deaths of those they claimed to condemn was too monstrous to comprehend. But there was no denying it. There was no way to ignore the implications of what she had just heard. What if Kael was right all along? A voice from behind her asked, a hint of wonder and fear in the tone. Her heart twisted at the mention of his name. She had tried so hard to distance herself from him, from his words, from his ideals. But here they were, in the streets, carried by the whispers of the people. The very doubts he had planted were now taking root, spreading like wildfire. And then, she saw it. A child, no older than 10, running through the streets, laughing and playing a game with other children. The game was innocuous, an for a mock battle of heroes and villains. But the child's words, shouted in jest, made Elendra freeze. "You're the killer priest," the child declared, pointing a wooden sword at another child. The response from the other child was a laugh. "No, I'm Kael. I expose the lies." The other children giggled, the absurdity of the game lost on them. But for Elendra, the game was no longer innocent. It was a reminder of the world Kael had shown her, a world where nothing was as it seemed, where every truth was questioned, and every lie was exposed. Her heart pounded in her chest as the child's laughter echoed in her mind, a reminder of the truth she was running from. She couldn't avoid it anymore. She found him as she had expected at the abandoned rose garden near the southern cliff. The roses had long withered, their petals crumbled and brittle beneath the weight of time. Yet the view was still magnificent. The sprawling city of Viramont spread out below them, its white spires and gleaming buildings a symbol of an empire that now seemed fragile. Kael stood at the edge of the garden, his back to her as always. He did not turn when she approached. He did not need to. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice strained with the weight of everything that had happened. "You came anyway," Kael replied, his voice calm, almost too calm. "The church is calling for your execution," she said, her voice faltering despite her best efforts to remain firm. "Let them call," Kael responded, his tone flat, indifferent. She hesitated for a moment, then took a step closer. "Do you even care?" she asked, the words slipping from her lips before she could stop them. "Do you care that they want you dead? That they call you a heretic?" Kael finally turned, his eyes meeting hers. There was no fear in his gaze, no hesitation, only calm, unwavering certainty. "Do you believe them?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Elendra looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Kael stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. He was always close, always just out of reach, like a shadow that never left her side. "Then believe this," Kael said, his voice cold and steady. "Doubt is the beginning of truth." She clenched her fists, feeling the metal of her gauntlets bite into her skin. "You manipulated everything. The heretics, the crowd, even Arona. And yet here you are," Kael interrupted, his voice cutting through her words like a blade. "Not stopping me, not drawing your blade." "Why?" Silence fell between them, thick and heavy. Kael stepped even closer, his presence almost suffocating. "You want to know," he said, his voice low, "if what I say is true. Because some part of you knows it is. Some part of you sees the cracks in their light." His words echoed in her mind, louder than the pounding of her heart. She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her, a weight she could no longer ignore. "They want blind obedience," Kael continued, his voice smooth as silk. "I want you to see." Elendra felt a shiver run down her spine. "You want me to betray the gods?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No," Kael murmured, his voice a caress. "I want you to stop worshipping masks." Their eyes locked, and in that moment, she saw the truth in his gaze. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't love. It was something far colder, a certainty that only Kael possessed. "You will choose," Kael said, his voice a command, not a suggestion. "Not today, but soon." "And when I do?" she asked, her voice shaking. Kael's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. "Then the world will tremble with your answer." In the throne chamber of the imperial palace, the empress sat in quiet contemplation, listening to her spymaster's report. Her fingers tapped idly on the armrest of her throne as she considered the implications of the news. "They've lost the hero's shine," the spymaster reported, his voice low. "And Elendra Broken Bar hesitates." The empress's golden gaze narrowed. The flickering light of the torches reflected off her pale skin, accentuating the sharp features of her face. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and they fixed firmly on her spymaster. "Then perhaps it's time we decide what kind of empire we want," she murmured, her voice low and dangerous. "One ruled by faith or by fear?" "Kael's influence grows," the spymaster added cautiously. "Then bring him to me," the empress commanded, her voice a chilling blend of authority and quiet fury. She stood slowly, her every movement deliberate and measured, as if she were preparing for a battle. The air around her seemed to hum with the promise of something darker. "I want to see what makes even angels bleed," she whispered. The grand halls of Varmerith Cathedral were suffocating with silence. Not a single chant echoed. No hymns rose into the vaulted ceilings that towered above, their ornate arches twisting into the heavens like the hands of divine supplicants. The once celebratory echoes of faith were now strangled beneath the weight of doubt. The air was thick with the heavy scent of incense, but it could not mask the smell of decay. The gilded saints, carved meticulously along the marble walls, looked down with lifeless eyes. Their painted gazes were unable to save the trembling clergy who filled the chamber, shuffling nervously beneath the weight of an invisible pressure. It was as if the stones themselves were whispering that something darker was coming. At the center of it all sat High Priest Gregorin, his eyes narrowed, fingers clenched tightly around the arms of his ceremonial throne. His knuckles, pale as bone, trembled only slightly, but his mind raced. The cracks in his empire of faith had spread too far, too fast. The royal alliance hesitated. The nobles whispered. The faithful doubted. The church's centuries-old authority, its divine power over the law, the soul, and even the throne was beginning to rot from within. Something was poisoning the people's hearts, and Gregorin knew it was no mere coincidence. It wasn't just a rumor, this was deliberate. "This is not mere rumor," Gregorin hissed, his voice barely more than a whisper, but laced with venom. He stood suddenly, his robes rustling like the wings of a great bird preparing to take flight. "This is precision." It wasn't panic, not yet. It was something colder, a predator's recognition of another predator. Someone was orchestrating this, weaving falsehood into truth, twisting virtue into poison, turning loyalty into betrayal. A shadow behind the curtain, Gregorin muttered, scanning the chamber. His gaze fell upon the gathered priests and holy knights, dozens of them, all standing beneath the fractured rays of stained glass. His voice lowered, commanding and deliberate. "We do not strike, we summon salvation." His words sent a ripple of uncertainty through the room, whispers darting through the air like startled birds. But none dared to speak aloud. None dared to challenge the high priest. Not yet. At the far side of the room, a kneeling figure clad in gleaming silver armor slowly rose. His every movement was a demonstration of divine purpose, each shift of his weight in his polished boots a testament to the unwavering devotion of the hero. The hero's armor shone with the faint glow of celestial magic, etchings of divine runes gleaming beneath the surface. His eyes, pale blue like sharpened glass, were unwavering, betraying no hint of doubt or fear. He stood as a monument to righteousness, a living sword of Etnia, the god of light and justice. Gregorin regarded him with something akin to reverence, but his voice was sharp when he spoke. "You've been silent long enough. It's time they remember why you were chosen." The hero's gaze remained fixed on Gregorin. His lips parted, and his voice was like the clang of a hammer on an anvil. "I will burn the heresy from their hearts." Gregorin's smile was cold, a smile that held no warmth, only the thrill of power. "Then go, holy blade of Eternia. Show them what it means to defy the divine." The hero did not hesitate. He moved with the certainty of a man who believed in the purity of his cause. His every step was measured, deliberate, as he made his way to the heart of the city where the heretics has been gathered. Across the city, leaned back in his velvet chair in the shadows of a chamber lined with dark wood and deep hues. His gaze was fixed on the sealed report before him, a smirk creeping across his lips as he read the last lines. "Perfect," he murmured, his voice a low whisper, laced with something darker, anticipation, maybe even amusement. Beside him, Eveline stood, her arms crossed in front of her, the tightness of her posture betraying her anxiety. "You expected this?" she asked, her voice tinged with a note of incredulity. Kael didn't look at her, his eyes remained fixed on the report. "Expected?" he asked, an edge to his voice. "I crafted this." Everything of the public unrest, the whispers in the streets, the heretics they'd selected, the carefully orchestrated executions, all that had been part of a single, carefully laid plan. Every piece was moving exactly as Kael had designed it. The hero, the church's greatest weapon, would soon become its downfall. "Are you going to kill him?" Eveline asked, her brow furrowing as she regarded him, still unsure of his intent. Kael chuckled softly, the sound almost mocking. "Kill the hero?" "Not yet." Eveline raised an eyebrow. "Then what?" Kael's eyes gleamed, a sharp, calculating gleam that was more akin to a predator sizing up its prey. "I'm going to turn him into a villain." The central square of Viremont had been transformed into a grand stage for the execution. The marble platform gleamed in the afternoon sun, polished to a sheen that made it look like a place for sacred rites. The crowds gathered in hushed silence, their eyes locked on the figure standing tall at the center of it all. The hero. His divine armor glinted in the sunlight as he stood like an executioner. The people's gaze was drawn to him with an almost reverent awe. To them, he was the symbol of purity, the unshakable shield of the gods. But today, he was to be the sword of judgment. Before him, shackled to the platform, were two heretics. A man and a woman are both in torn, dirty clothes that wore the unmistakable marks of the condemned. The hero had already been briefed on their crime. They had spoken out against the church, whispered the truth of the corruption within its walls. A murmur passed through the crowd as the hero raised his sword high, its blade catching the sunlight and reflecting it in a blinding flash. His voice rang out, harsh and final, "By divine will, you are judged guilty. Do you have final words?" The man, his voice trembling, spoke first. "We only spoke the truth." The woman's words were stronger, more defiant. "The gods don't punish questions, only tyrants do." A ripple of surprise passed through the crowd. These weren't the words of heretics. These were the words of those who had seen beyond the veil. For a moment, the hero faltered. His grip on the hilt of his sword tightened, and for the briefest second, uncertainty flickered across his expression. But the mask of righteousness quickly returned. "Then let justice be done." With a single, decisive motion, the sword flashed downward. Two bodies collapsed to the ground. Blood spilled across the marble like a painter's stroke, vivid against the pale stone. The crowd went silent, their breath held in anticipation. "Anthena, monster!" a voice cried out, shrill and desperate. "Not justice." He slaughtered them. The hero's eyes darted around, confusion flashing across his face. This was not what he had been prepared for. This wasn't what he had been told would happen. He had been the divine sword, executing divine judgment. So why? Then he saw it. A sigil, painted beneath the bodies of the slain heretics, in blood. A twisted, ancient symbol, one that had long been forgotten by the faithful. A sigil from the old abyss. A cursey exclamation mark. One priest screamed, his voice cracked with terror. This was a ritual. Another shouted, his voice breaking as the realization spread like wildfire. The hero's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the weight of their eyes upon him, the shift in the air. "He's been corrupted!" someone screamed. "Kill him, heretic!" Panic swept through the crowd like wildfire. From a hidden rooftop across the square, Kael watched with a dark satisfaction. He stood, a quiet observer in the shadows, savoring the chaos as it unfolded. He played his role perfectly, Kael whispered, his smile curling at the corners of his mouth. Eveline, standing beside him, said nothing for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the chaos below. "You made him commit sacrilege," she said, her voice tinged with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. "And framed him for it." "No," Kael replied, his voice soft, yet sharp with certainty. "I made him prove the church is willing to kill truth to protect itself." "He'll be hunted now," Eveline warned, glancing at him. "He's marked for death." "Good," Kael said, turning his gaze toward her. "Let them chase him. Let them think they are purging him from the world, because tonight, I'll make sure the nobles know their holy protector is losing control." Eveline narrowed her eyes. "You're making them question the church itself." "I'm not making them do anything," Kael replied smoothly. "I'm giving them a reason to think." His gaze turned once more toward the distant cathedral, his smile widening. "The hero has begun his descent. And soon. When there's nothing left but ashes, a broken bar." He chuckled darkly. "He'll come crawling back to me." Chaos swept through the streets of Varmerith like a tempest. The once sacred city, home to faith, divine devotion, and peace, now reeked of discord. The scent of ash, smoke, and unrest filled the air as the sky above grew heavy with dark clouds, mirroring the turmoil below. No hymns rang out from the cathedral today. No chants lifted the spirits of the faithful. Instead, the thunderous roars of protesters drowned out the sacred echoes, demanding justice for those whose blood had stained the holy ground. They had witnessed the bloodshed of the hero's sword cutting down two heretics, but what was once viewed as divine retribution had twisted into a sacrilege in their eyes. The bloodied bodies of the accused lay sprawled across the square, crimson pooling under the cruel sun, and the whispers of the crowd stirred like a brewing storm. Did the gods ever favor him? Was he ever holy or just their weapon? The hero, once the shining beacon of faith, had become the center of an uproar. From the admiration of the people to their cries of betrayal, his fall was swift, as if fate itself had turned against him. Inside the cathedral's inner sanctum, beneath the towering arches and the flickering glow of altar candles, The hero knelt on cold marble. Blood stained his hands, though it had dried long ago. The weight of it felt heavy, sinking into his very soul. Each stain was a mark of something far darker than the mere death of two innocent lives. It was the seed of doubt, a doubt that festered within him now like a poison. Before him, High Priest Grigorin stood, bathed in the holy light of the altar, his countenance cold and unyielding. Once, Grigorin had been a father figure, a mentor. But now, he stood as a judge, sentencing the hero with words sharper than any sword. You were meant to restore the church's light, Grigorin's voice cut through the tension. Instead, you've drowned it in shadow. The hero's gaze remained vacant, his once confident eyes now hollow, as if drained of hope. His breathing was shallow, each exhale rattling like the last breath of a dying man. His once pristine armor, now tarnished with blood and guilt, seemed to weigh him down. I tried to uphold justice, the hero's voice trembled, barely a whisper. Grigorin raised a hand, silencing him with a simple gesture. Silence. The priest's voice cracked like thunder, each word echoing with an authority that made the air itself quake. You do not get to speak of justice. You slaughtered two dissenters in public, and in doing so, you opened a gateway of heresy. The hero staggered, his knees trembling beneath him. I didn't know about the sigil, he whispered, as if the words could offer any salvation. Grigorin's eyes hardened, his lips curling in contempt. Intent does not absolve corruption. His voice was ice, every syllable calculated, designed to strip the hero of his last shred of dignity. The priest's gaze pierced the hero's soul, and for the first time, the man who had once been exalted or revered as a divine instrumentor saw nothing but disdain in the eyes of the one who had raised him. The man who had once called him the holy blade of Eternia now looked upon him with disgust. The nobles demand answers. The faithful waver. And you were broken. Grigorin's voice trailed off, his disgust palpable. You've become a liability. The hero's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing louder than the last. You would cast me aside? The words were like a plea, a desperate cry for the guidance he had once found in the man before him. Grigorin's face was a mask of stone. I would bury you, if it meant preserving the faith. The hero's breath caught in his throat. It was as if the ground beneath him had split open, and he was falling into an abyss from which he could not escape. The weight of Grigorin's words crushed him, suffocating the last remnants of his spirit. A long silence followed. Then came the verdict, the one that would change everything. You are stripped of your title, Grigorin declared, his voice cold and final. Your sword, your blessings, your statues are all revoked. Leave this city. Seek redemption in exile. Until then, a broken bar, you are nothing. The words hit him like a falling star, fast, searing, and final. The hero, once the holy blade of Eternia, was no more. Outside the cathedral, the city burned. The people cried for justice, for vengeance, for retribution against the heretic who had once been their savior. They did not yet know how close they were to losing everything. But inside, in the shadows of the holy place, the hero's world crumbled. Across the city, in the comfort of his private chambers, leaned back in his velvet chair, savoring the moment as if it were a fine wine. His fingers drummed lightly on the armrest, a soft, measured rhythm that matched the pulse of his own satisfaction. The report had arrived earlier, sealed and signed, confirming the hero's fall. Eveline stood nearby, her figure a shadow against the flickering candlelight. She watched him with a mixture of curiosity and intrigue. It's done, she said, her voice calm yet carrying the weight of expectation. Grigorin cast him out. Kael didn't bother looking up from his glass of wine, his gaze fixed on the flickering candlelight before him. Good, he murmured, the words slipping from his lips like a soft exhale. He swirled the wine in the glass, watching the deep red liquid shift in the dim light. Eveline arched an eyebrow, clearly expecting more. No triumphant speech? Kael's lips curled into a smile, but there was no joy in it, only cold calculation. This was never about stripping his title, he said, his voice low, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. It's about shattering what's left of him. He set the wine glass down gently, as though placing a fragile object back into its rightful place. Then he turned to face Eveline, his eyes gleaming with a dark, almost predatory light. The divine mantle was just a mask, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. But now I'll burn the man beneath it. Eveline stepped closer, her curiosity piqued. And how do you plan to finish him off? Kael's smile deepened, a glint of malice flashing in his eyes. By taking what he still believes he has left. Eveline's brow furrowed in confusion. Kael nodded, the smile never leaving his lips. Somewhere deep in the rain-soaked forests of Eldwin, a small cottage stood, hidden from the chaos that had overtaken the capital. The wind howled outside, and the sound of rain slashing against the windows filled the silence of the modest interior. Inside, the hero sat by a hearth, its warmth a stark contrast to the coldness that had settled within his heart. No armor adorned him now, no sword at his side. Only a broken man, lost in the silence of his own thoughts. His hands trembled as he stared into the fire, though he didn't feel its warmth. The crackling flames offered no comfort. He didn't hear her enter. But when he turned, she was the woman he had loved beyond all things. She stood in the doorway, a soft smile on her lips, though her eyes were filled with worry. Her gentle presence filled the room with a fleeting sense of calm. "You'll catch a cold," she said softly, offering him a towel. He took it without a word, his hands shaking as he dried his face, unable to meet her eyes. He couldn't bear the weight of her gaze. "You're not alone," she whispered, her voice gentle, like a lullaby. For a moment, the hero closed his eyes, feeling the coldness within him slowly retreat. Her warmth, her presence, was the only thing holding him together now. But what he didn't know, or what he could never have known, was that she was already lost to him. She had already pledged herself to Kael. Back in his study, Kael finished writing a letter, his hand steady as the quill sliced through the parchment with precision. Every word, every sentence, was deliberate, a crafted instrument of destruction. Eveline watched him from her seat, swirling wine in her goblet. "Another move?" she asked, her tone laced with intrigue. Kael folded the letter, sealing it with his insignia. "A seed of doubt," he said, his voice as cold and calculated as ever. "One letter is all it takes to turn a heart a broken bar against itself." He handed the letter to a cloaked messenger, his fingers brushing the parchment as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. "Send this to her," Kael ordered. "She'll read it in secret. And when she does, the war inside her will begin." Eveline's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a faint smile. "You're unraveling him piece by piece." "Ruthless." Kael's smirk returned, sharper than before. "He was their light," he whispered, his voice carrying a dark promise. "I will make him crave the dark." As the messenger disappeared into the night, a gust of wind extinguished one of the candles in Kael's study. Only his eyes remained alight, burning like distant stars in the void. The letter arrived under the cover of night. It was like a shadow slipping into her life. Sealed in black wax, its edges carefully folded, the parchment seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 whispered secrets. It slipped beneath her chamber door without a sound, almost as if it knew her heart. Her name was written with dark ink, each stroke deliberate, elegant, a careful brush against her very soul. Ilara's heart skipped a beat as she crouched beside the door, her fingers trembling as they reached for the letter. For a moment, she considered leaving it there, untouched, but the urgency that pulsed in her chest, the quiet pull of the unknown, drew her in. She could already feel the weight of its contents pressing down on her. She shouldn't open it. The thought echoed in her mind, but it came too late. With a soft sigh, she broke the seal, the sound sharp in the silence of the room. A shiver ran down her spine as she unfolded the parchment, her breath catching in her throat. The words on the page glimmered with a dark allure. They were written for Hera, only her, no one else. She could feel that in every word, every curve of ink, every delicate curl that had been painstakingly placed there. Clardon. Her heart stuttered at the sight of his name. She hadn't seen him in weeks, but his presence lingered, heavy like the promise of a storm. The hero her Herlavia was slipping further away with every passing day. Peculiar broken bar. Kael always seemed to have a way of appearing at the right moment, sliding into the spaces between their lives like smoke through cracks in a door. She hesitated for only a moment before she began to read. "Dearest Ilara, forgive my intrusion in these trying times, but I cannot remain silent. I know the burden you bear, the weight of standing beside a man who no longer stands for himself. You gave him your unwavering devotion. But tell me, Ilara Broken Bar, does he still deserve it? They call you the hero's lover. But I see you, Ilara not as a shadow of another's legacy, but as a woman whose kindness outshines the stars, whose spirit was never meant to be shackled by another's fall. He is drowning in the weight of his failures, and if you remain a broken bar he will pull you under with him. I will not tell you what choice to make, only that, should your heart seek something more, you know where to find me. Ecladan. The words cut into her like a blade. Her hands shook violently as she finished reading, the paper crinkling beneath her fingers. The room felt colder, as if something unseen had entered and wrapped itself around her heart. She felt the shift in the air, like the first stirrings of a storm. Her mind screamed to ignore it, to forget about the letter, to burn it, to keep the old, steady truth that she had always known. But in the silence, the words kept echoing in her ears, louder than any protest from her heart. Does he still deserve it? The question lingered in her mind like a poison, curling and twisting, taking root in places she thought were safe. She loved him. She had always loved him. But lately, every day felt like a struggle. His eyes, once full of purpose, had grown dull with doubt. His hands, once so sure of their grip, trembled in hers. He was changing before her eyes, and she could feel it. The harrower, the man who had once stood as a symbol of hope, he was crumbling. And Kael, a broken Barkle, had whispered the truths she couldn't ignore. Her fingers clenched around the parchment. The ink smudged beneath her touch, blurring his name, but she didn't care. She could still hear his voice in her mind, soft and insistent, cutting through the storm. He is drowning in the weight of his failures, and if you remain, he will pull you under with him. The hero was no longer the man she had loved. The weight of his failures had begun to crush him, and in his despair, he sought her to save him. But had she been enough to keep him afloat? She stood, the letter slipping from her hands and falling to the floor as her heart raced. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she tried to quell the growing tide of uncertainty in her chest. What if he was right? Ilara shook her head violently, fighting the thoughts clawing at her mind. She needed to believe in him. She needed to. He was the hero. He was the one who had always stood stronger until now. But as she turned to look at him, she found that he no longer stood tall. He was no longer the man she had followed into battle, the man she had pledged her life to. He was just a broken bar man. Ilara. His voice was weak, fragile, almost unfamiliar. She turned, her chest tightening as she looked at him. He was standing in the doorway, his eyes hollow, his face drawn in exhaustion. His once proud armor was gone, replaced with the tattered remnants of what he had been. He looked smaller, less than what he had been just a few months ago. She swallowed, but it felt like there was something stuck in her throat. Yes. He stepped closer, his movements slow, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. Do you still believe in me? The question hung in the air, a heavy, oppressive thing. His eyes searched hers, looking for an answer she wasn't sure she could give. A moment passed, longer than it should have, and Ilara opened her mouth, but the words faltered. Do I still believe in him? Her hesitation was like 1,000 knives to his heart. His face paled, the blood draining from his cheeks. The room seemed to darken as the seconds ticked by, as if the very light of their shared history was beginning to fade. She couldn't answer. She didn't know if she could anymore. He turned away, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The words he had always spoken so confidently now seemed like ghosts, lost in the silence between them. "Illa broken bar, I'll be in the next room," he muttered, the weight of those words heavier than any armor. He disappeared, his footsteps retreating into the shadows. Ilara stood frozen, her heart aching with a grief that had no name. She had never seen him like this. She had never seen him broken. And yet, in the depths of her own heart, a small seed of doubt had already taken root. It had been planted by Kael, watered by her own fears, and now a broken bar it was blooming. A storm brewed in her chest, twisting, clawing at her soul. She could feel the pull of Kael's words in every corner of her being, and from the shadows, Kael watched. He stood in the dim light of the balcony, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, his hands resting lightly on the stone railing. The city beneath him was quiet, but the storm he had set in motion was far from over. Eveline stood beside him, her eyes glinting with curiosity. "Do you think she'll come?" Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. Kael's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't one of satisfaction, it was a smile of quiet certainty. "Not yet," he murmured, his voice soft and deliberate. "But she will," Eveline scoffed, leaning back against the stone. "You're playing with fire." "She's devoted to him." Kael chuckled darkly, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "Devotion is a fragile thing, Eveline. It withers when left in the shadow of doubt." She eyed him, her sharp gaze taking in the careful play of his expression. "And if she doesn't break?" His fingers traced the rim of his wine glass, slow and deliberate, the motion almost hypnotic. "Then I'll break her myself." Eveline's eyes narrowed as she studied him, but she said nothing more. She didn't need to. Kael's words carried a finality that echoed in the air around them. He was a man who didn't play for second place. What he wanted, he took. A gust of wind blew across the balcony, flickering the candlelight in front of them. Kael didn't flinch. The darkness, the cold, the storm, it didn't matter. Nothing mattered but the game, and in this game, he would be the one to win. He didn't need Elara's love. What he needed was to take everything the hero cherished and make it his own. The morning sunlight bled through the curtains, soft and pale against the grayness of the room. The hero awoke to the faint scent of Elara's presence, but as his eyes flickered open, he felt the absence of something he couldn't name. She was there, sitting at the table, her movements slow, almost deliberate in their slowness. He studied her. She wasn't the same. Her touch had been less warm last night, her words less certain. He watched her for a long moment, his mind screaming for answers that he couldn't find. She looked up, meeting his gaze with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning." The smile was forced. He could see that now. And when she kissed him, her lips lingered only for a heartbeat before pulling away. Something was wrong. He stood, his legs unsteady beneath him as his hands clenched into fists. He took a step toward her, his voice lower than usual. "Elara." She turned, startled by the tension in his voice. "Yes." He stepped closer, his chest tight with fear. The storm inside him had grown louder, crashing against his ribs like the pounding of waves. "Do you still believe in me?" For a moment, her lips parted only for hesitation to fill the space between them. It was a hesitation that had never existed before. A heartbeat too long passed before she could answer, but the words that left her lips were unsaid. And in that pause, he understood. Doubt had already taken root. A bitter smile twisted on his lips, but his hands trembled. I won't lose her." He couldn't. Not like this. Not to Kael. Not to anyone. And from the shadows, Kael smiled. The grand banquet hall shimmered with opulency. Thousands of enchanted chandeliers suspended in cascading tiers, casting golden light upon walls of crimson velvet and polished obsidian. Every goblet overflowed with vintage wine, and music drifted like smoke between murmured conversations and forced laughter, all masked beneath an air of civility that felt as fragile as glass. Elara felt none of it. Seated beside the hero, her expression was one of serene composure, her eyes scanning the room with detached interest. But inside, a storm raged. The room's ambience seemed colder now. Not the temperature, no, the enchanted warmth of the hall was still as welcoming as ever. It was the atmosphere, the subtle, invisible shift in the way the guests looked at the hero. Once, his presence had commanded the room, silent yet undeniable in its weight. But now, eyes watched him with concealed doubt, a shift in respect to reluctant courtesy. He had faltered in battle. His honor had been questioned. The world had smelled blood, and it could sense weakness. Even the king, once deferential, spoke to him with a tone that had shifted from reverence to distant, almost reluctant, politeness. The flicker of judgment was subtle, but it was there, creeping behind every sentence. Across the hall, cloaked in shadow and silk, Cladon stood like a sentinel, observing it all. The subtle changes, the shifting of allegiances, the whispers that danced around the room like a living thing. Kael didn't need a throne to command power. No title, no divine favor, no accolades. He had something far more potent, control. A power that lived beneath the surface, unseen, yet impossible to ignore. And tonight, he would use it. Elara's gaze, almost against her will, drifted to Kael for the briefest second. She hadn't meant to. But the moment their eyes locked, something within her trembled like a predator's gaze upon prey, cold and sharp. That familiar flutter in her chest stirred again, followed by the slow curl of heat at the base of her spine. She told herself it was disgust, revulsion, the feeling of his manipulation taking root in her mind. But deep down, she knew better. She knew the truth. Kael's power over her had begun far before that moment. It had been growing, subtle and insidious, taking root in her soul in places she hadn't yet dared to examine. The hero was deep in conversation with the king. His head was lowered, his brow furrowed in what appeared to be an attempt at some kind of strategy. He should have been surrounded by allies, but now, his aura felt strained like a sword that had been tested and was starting to show cracks. Elara should have followed him, flanked him, bolstered his strength. She had done it 100 times before. But now, she hesitated. Something about tonight felt different. Something about Kael felt different. And Kael, ever the predator, seized the moment. "You're far too graceful to be sitting alone," his voice purred from the shadows, low, velvety, and yet tinged with a subtle venom. Elara stiffened. She turned to face him slowly, her movement measured and calculated. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to remain composed, to not show the subtle quiver that ran through her veins. "You speak out of turn," she said, her voice sharp, but the words felt hollow. Kael inclined his head, his lips curving upward into that infuriating, knowing smile. "Then I beg your forgiveness, Lady Elara." His eyes never left hers, as if the weight of his gaze could bind her to the moment. "But if you're so offended," a broken bar he continued, his voice laced with an almost maddening sweetness, "a broken bar, why haven't you left?" Her jaw tightened at the question, the sharpness of his words striking deeper than she would have liked. She was no fool. She knew exactly what he was doing. Kael's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it, only a chill, an emptiness. "Tell me something. When did he last see you? Truly see you?" Not as the hero's companion, not as a symbol of his strength, not as a piece of the puzzle he tries to complete, but as a woman. The words struck like a whip, cutting through the layers of politeness and civility that had kept her anchored. Elara's breath caught, and her chest tightened with a mixture of anger and confusion. "I won't entertain your games," she managed to say, her voice far more brittle than she intended. "No," Kael murmured, "you already are." The quiet of the banquet hall seemed to stretch in a moment that followed, the weight of his words hanging like a cloak over them. His voice slid under her skin like silk-wrapped daggers, so smooth, so insidious, she could barely feel the wound until it was too late. "When was the last time he touched you?" Kael whispered, his voice barely above her breath. "And you felt something real." "That was it." The breaking point. Her wine glass trembled in her grasp, the crystal shifting under her fingers, the liquid inside rippling in an almost imperceptible wave. Her heart thudded in her chest, louder than the distant music or the clinking of silverware around them. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping back with a harsh, screeching sound that echoed through the hall, jarring in the sudden, heavy silence. Eyes turned. Conversations paused, and all that remained was the haunting silence of a room too aware of her departure. The hero glanced her way, his brow furrowing with confusion. But Elara didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her pulse was loud in her ears, her skin hot, as if the temperature had suddenly risen in a room that had once felt cold and distant. Without another glance, she strode out of the banquet hall, her footsteps too quick, too loud, each one a cacophony of guilt and fury combined. Kael watched her leave with the patience of a man who knew the seed had already been planted. His lips curled into the faintest of smiles as he turned his gaze back to the hero, who had now fully turned to face him, still unaware of the true nature of the game being played. That night, Elara lay beside the hero, the weight of the events of the evening still heavy on her mind. He lay fast asleep, the rise and fall of his chest steady in the quiet room. She should have felt relief or comfort, perhaps, but all she felt was a hollow emptiness that seemed to stretch across the vast expanse of the bed between them. He hadn't asked where she had gone. He hadn't even noticed the tension in her movements, the stiffness in her shoulders as she joined him, her mind still grappling with Kael's words, the depth of his gaze, and that silence between them. It screamed louder than anything her lips could utter. She stared up at the ceiling, the moonlight streaming in through the windows, casting its pale glow over the room. Every word Kael had spoken to her echoed in her mind, a constant refrain that she couldn't shake. "When was the last time he touched you and you felt something real?" Her fingers brushed her lips, but it was not a kiss that lingered there. It was the phantom of one, unspoken, forbidden. Kael had never touched her, but it didn't matter. The space between them had already been bridged by something far more dangerous: his words, his presence, his manipulation. She hated it. Hated how her body reacted, how her pulse quickened, how her skin burned, all at the mere thought of him. Hated how her mind raced with thoughts of him, of that glint in his eyes, his knowing smile. He had not touched her, but he didn't need to. He had already gotten into her mind. And now, Clardon lived there, a tenant in her thoughts, uninvited yet impossible to ignore. Kael stood alone on a balcony overlooking the silent city, the moonlight draping over him like a royal mantle. The vast expanse of the capital sprawled before him, the lights of the city flickering like distant stars. In the quiet of the night, he could almost taste the power that hovered just out of reach. "She's slipping," Eveline's voice broke the stillness from behind him, soft and measured, her silhouette a shadow against the flickering lights of the city. Kael's lips curved into a subtle, unreadable smile as he turned his gaze toward her. "She won't leave him yet." "But she's already begun to question." Eveline's gaze darkened, a flicker of something sharp passing through her eyes. "And when she realizes what she truly desires." Kael turned fully to her, his eyes gleaming with the cool, detached amusement of a man who knew exactly what was to come. "When she realizes it, she won't run. She'll fall." His voice was a whisper in the wind, carrying the weight of inevitability. The halls of the ivory citadel shimmered beneath the ethereal glow of silver flame torches, their fire casting long shadows that danced across obsidian columns etched with forgotten sigils. It was a place carved not just from stone, but from legend, an ancient bastion of power where faith once reigned, and secrets still lingered like ghosts in the dark. Sacred incense perfumed the air of frankincense, myrrh, crushed moonlily petals, all meant to soothe the soul, to elevate the mind, to sanctify presence. Yet to Ellen Trevelyan, it felt like a shroud. Too thick, too sweet. It clung to her throat, stifling each breath like a prayer turned poison. She stood near the open balcony, marble beneath her boots, moonlight gilding her silver-blue armor with a faint sheen. The wind stirred her moon-pale hair, catching strands and tugging them free from her braid. But her body remained frozen, rigid with something she could not name, mere fear, perhaps, or something far more dangerous, doubt. Her hands gripped the stone railing so tightly her knuckles had turned bloodless. She had come here with purpose, with righteous fury. She was to confront the serpent in his den, reject his poisoned words, cast down his illusions and remind herself of who she was. A knight, a guardian, the hero's chosen. And yet a broken bar she had lingered. Behind her, he moved like a shadow given form, a Clardon, draped in black and silver robes that caught the torchlight like the surface of still water. He poured golden wine into twin crystal goblets, the clink of glass against silver a delicate, calculated sound. Nothing about him was unmeasured. Nothing was ever accidental. He looked like temptation distilled into a mana refined, composed, untouched by the burdens of conscience. His presence filled the room without force, like gravity, inescapable, inevitable. "You still hesitate," Kael murmured, voice a low hum that curled round her like velvet shackles. Ellendra's breath caught, and she closed her eyes. "I should not be here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She hated how it trembled. Kael did not answer at first. He sipped his wine with the grace of a man entirely in control, his gaze fixed upon her back, observing, calculating, but not unkind. Never unkind. That was the danger. And yet, here you are. The wind outside howled, as if trying to pull her away from this place here, from him. But it wasn't the wind that held her here. It was the pull of something deeper, something far more insidious. His words, his gaze. Him. She turned, slowly. Her sapphire eyes burned with a righteous fire, a fire born from pain, from betrayal, from conviction. But Kael had seen that fire before. He knew its true nature. It was not the fire of purity. It was the fire of a woman cracking under the weight of 1,000 unseen wounds. He had studied her as a scholar studies a sacred text. Not just her loyalty to Archon, the hero, but the fractures in her soul, the weight of the crownless burden she bore, the silent torment of being held as a symbol or paragon of virtue, the light that must never dim. She had learned to hide her pain in armor, in oaths, in the way she held herself like a blade. And Kael, a broken bar, he had whispered to that silence, gently, persistently, like a serpent coiling around her heart. "You loathe me, he said, closing the distance with slow, deliberate steps. But not because of what I've done. Her breath hit Shida, betraying her before her lips could form protest. You loathe me, he continued, voice a silken blade, because I see you without the mask. And worse still, you see elf or broken bar in what I reflect. She stepped back instinctively, as if physical distance could shield her from the truth in his words. You twist truth like a blade. I merely hold the mirror, Kael said, calmly. You despise the reflection. Another step closer. He moved like a man who knew the ground would yield to him. Like a tide come to shore. His fingers brushed against her wrist, barely a whisper of toucher, but it ignited her nerves like wildfire. She jerked away, but the sensation lingered. You love a man, Kael said softly, who loves an ideal. Not you. Not the woman who questions, who bleeds, who craves more than blind duty. Stop, she whispered, her voice breaking. But it wasn't a command. It was a plea. Kael leaned in, lips brushing just behind her ear. His breath was warm, terrifying. You don't belong in his world of absolutes, he murmured. You were born for the gray, for choice, for freedom. I am not like you, she said, breathless. You could be. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Her vision blurred, and not from tears, but from the storm inside her. Every fiber of her being pulled in opposite directions, a duty versus desire, light versus shadow. And yet Kael had not asked her to choose him. He had only asked her to look inward. She turned away, shaking, trying to rebuild the walls within herself that he kept pulling down. Her thoughts spiraled, memories clashing like swords of Archons' unwavering faith, of battles fought side by side, of oaths sworn beneath dying stars. But also of Kael's voice in the dark, his unwavering calm, his cruel, brutal truths that spoke to parts of her Archon had never seen, could never see. Footsteps, swift, urgent. Kael's gaze shifted, his poise altering in a breath. The predator sheathed its claws. A servant appeared at the threshold, cloaked in grey, eyes fixed to the floor. My lord, the man said, voice taut. Urgent news. Kael's voice became cold, clipped. Speak. The servant leaned in, whispering low. The hero has entered the city. He seeks an audience with Lady Elendra. Silence fell like a blade. Elendra stiffened. Her breath caught in her throat. Guilt, fear, confusion. It surged within her like a storm unbound. Kael said nothing for a long moment. Then he smiled. But it was not joy. It was inevitability. A perfect curve of lips that spoke not of hope, but of design. He turned to her slowly, catching her gaze. His voice was once more that whisper of silk and steel. It seems fate has come knocking, my lady. She looked away, unable to meet his eyes. The air between them was charged with something unspoken, an unfinished question, a blade never drawn. A broken bar must go, she said softly. Her voice lacked certainty. It sounded like retreat. Kael did not move to stop her. He did not speak. But as she reached the archway, his voice cut through the silence like a dagger cloaked in velvet. He will ask you for the truth, Kael said. But will you give him his brother broken bar or yours? She faltered just for a second, then she walked on, her form swallowed by the shadowed halls. Kael stood alone. He lifted the untouched goblet of golden wine, swirled it once. Light caught in the liquid like sunlight trapped in glass. He did not drink. Instead, he laughed quietly. Not with mirth, not with cruelty, but with certainty. The serpent had coiled. Now it would wait, and strike. The great hall of Lorien's keep thrummed with unspoken conflict, its vast, vaulted ceiling arching high above like the ribcage of some ancient leviathan. The obsidian columns lining the walls pulsed faintly with arcane sigils, old magic sleeping beneath their cold surfaces. Enchanted lanterns floated just below the ceiling, suspended in orbits of faint golden light that flickered like dying stars. The light bathed the room in a warm hue, but it failed to reach the shadows stretching along the periphery, shadows that seemed to draw breath. Two men stood alone at the heart of this silent arena. Cladon, draped in robes of midnight silk and shadow thread, looked more like a specter than a man. His crimson eyes gleamed in the firelight, unsettlingly steady, patient. One hand held a goblet of vintage Valerian wine, the liquid within the color of old blood. He looked utterly relaxed, too relaxed, like a spider whose web had just begun to tremble. The polished black marble beneath his feet reflected him in blurred, serpentine shapes. Opposite him stood Valen Stormart, the people's hero, hallowed by the light. His presence, once commanding, now cracked with unspoken conflict. His silvered armor bore the signs of countless battlers as scratches, faded etchings, the faint burn of lightning from his duel with the abyss-bound Whim. But no enemy he had ever faced had tested him like this moment. No blade, no beast, no dark god had ever made him feel this. Unsure. His sapphire eyes, once beacons of unwavering resolve, now flickered with something far more dangerous. Doubt. Between them hung the ghost of a name unspoken for several seconds too long, Elendra. She had left just minutes ago, her presence still clinging to the space like incense smoke, here warm, uncertain, lingering. Her final glance had been unreadable. Kael raised his glass in mock salute. "Stormart," he said, voice smooth as lacquered velvet. "To what do I owe this dramatic visit?" Valen stepped forward, his boots echoing like war drums on stone. "You know damn well why I'm here." Kael's smile was lazy, indulgent. "Do I? You will stay away from Elendra." The room grew colder. Kael chuckled, low and amused. He breathed, swirling his wine, "so we arrive at the heart of it." He took a slow step forward, sipping from his goblet like a man savoring a vintage long-aged for moments like these. His eyes never left Valen's. "You're here," Kael continued, "because she came to me." Valen's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to reach for his sword, or wanted it more than he wanted breath. But this wasn't the battlefield. This was something far more treacherous, Kael's domain, a place where words killed more than blades, and silence could be a noose. "You manipulated her," Valen growled. "Twisted her thoughts." "You preyed on her weakness." Kael tilted his head, crimson eyes glowing faintly as if amused by the accusation. "Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night, hero? That she was weak? That only deception could draw her away from your shining pedestal?" He began to circle slowly, deliberately, at each step a silk-wrapped threat. Valen stayed rooted, the tightness in his stance revealing the war beneath his skin. "You paint me as the serpent, Valen," Kael murmured. "But what does it say about you that she listened? That she stayed? That when given a choice, see a broken bar, she came back?" Again and again. Valen's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. The silence was a battlefield now, and Kael was cutting him open with every step. "She is loyal," Valen said finally, voice quiet but firm. "She is human," Kael corrected, stopping just an arm's length away. "And humans change, especially when they begin to see the cracks in their so-called perfect heroes." Valen's eyes flashed with pain. "You think this is a game?" he demanded, voice rising. Kael didn't flinch. "No," he said softly. "I think it's a revelation." He stepped closer, unblinking, until Valen could see the faint shimmer of something arcane moving beneath his skin. "Not magic, not power, understanding." "I didn't lure her with promises, Valen," Kael said, voice dark and intimate now. "I saw her. Not the Lady of Light, not the symbol draped in righteousness. I saw Elendra, the woman beneath the armor, the one who questions, the one who wonders if the war will ever end, the one who dreams of something more than being your blade in the dark." Valen's breath hitched. He didn't want to believe it, couldn't. But somewhere deep, something cold and horrible whispered that Kael might be telling the truth. "You never saw her," Kael continued, relentless. "You saw a partner in battle, a cause, a symbol to polish beside your sword. But never the doubts behind her smile, never the shadows she kept hidden even from herself." "Stop," Valen whispered, but it came out more like a plea than a command. Kael leaned in, whispering now. "Tell me, Valina, if she truly belongs to you, why is she standing at a crossroads instead of by your side?" The words didn't land like blows. They sank, slow and merciless, into the softest parts of Valen's heart. And Kael saw it. The tremor behind those blue eyes. The subtle shift in his breathing. Doubt, insidious, quiet, irreversibly had taken root. Valen turned away, as if he could escape the truth simply by facing another direction. But the weight of Kael's words stayed draped over his shoulders like lead. A soft knock at the far end of the hall broke the standoff. A servant entered, head bowed. "My lord, a broken bar, the counselor waits." Kael nodded without turning. His gaze remained locked on Valen, crimson and unrelenting. With slow precision, he stepped back and drained the rest of his wine. Then he set the goblet down on a nearby pillar, its bass ringing faintly against the stone. He moved to Levia but paused just beside Valen. Their shoulders nearly brushed. "Do give Elendra my regards," Kael said, his voice now smooth as a dagger's kiss. "And when you see her again a broken bar, don't ask where she stands. Ask why she's wavering." He turned and walked away, his midnight robes trailing behind like smoke escaping a pyre. The doors opened before him and shut with a solemn finality. Valen stood alone in the vastness. The silence was no longer empty. It pulsed with uncertainty, with broken things left unsaid. Later that night, a broken bar. Valen sat at the edge of the training grounds, armor discarded, gauntlets lying beside him like empty promises. The moon hung low, casting silver over the polished stones where he and Elendra had once sparred, once laughed. He remembered the way her eyes used to light up, and not during victory, but when they talked about after the war, after the darkness, when they'd finally be free. But now a broken bar. Why did she go to him? He gritted his teeth, hands clenched into fists once more, but not in anger. In fear. A fear far greater than any he had known on the battlefield. The fear of losing something he never truly held. He remembered her last words before she left Kael's chambers. "I just need to think, Valen." She had said it gently, but there had been a firmness there, a line drawn, and Kael had known exactly where to strike. Elsewhere in the keep, a broken bar. Kael stood alone in his private study, watching the moonlight trickle across the ink on his latest correspondence. The Empress had written again. So had the Queen of the Abyss. So many pieces, shifting into place. But these a broken bar. This confrontation with Valen. Delicious. He could still taste the tension in the room, still feel the crack in the hero's armor. A serpent, perhaps. But some truths were venom, and Kael was more than willing to let them do their work. He closed his eyes, and somewhere, in the chambers not far from either man, Elendra sat alone, her heart no longer certain where it truly belonged. The moon, pale and haunting, cast its silvery glow through the arched windows of Lorien's keep. Its light splashed across the cold stone floors and climbed the walls, painting the room in a spectral embrace. Outside, the night was still, the world silent in its waiting, as through the earth itself held its breath. But within the chambers of Elendra Valkrest, the air was thick with something else, something darker, more pressing. Elendra sat at the edge of her bed, her body a rigid outline against the thick velvet of her nightgown. Her hands rested in her lap, trembling ever so slightly, as her breath came shallow and uneven. Her heart raced with a quiet intensity, its rhythm erratic, like a drumbeat too fast for the pulse of her thoughts to follow. Why had she gone to Kael? The question played on repeat in her mind, unraveling the fabric of her confidence, fraying the edges of her convictions. She could tell herself it was merely curiosity, a need for understanding that had driven her. But deep inside, she knew it was something more, something far more unsettling. There was something in the way Kael had looked at her, not with the gleam of admiration or lust that others had shown, but with the sharpness of someone who saw straight through her defenses. He had not seen the champion's companion, and no, not that hollow paragon of light that had been carefully crafted for the world to admire. Kael had seen her as she truly was, a woman beneath all the expectations, the facades. The woman who was tired, who had doubts, and dreams, and repressed desires that whispered quietly at night, begging for release. The realization was like ice in her veins. There was something terrifying in that look. Kael had reached into her beneath her skin, beneath the mask she wore, and touched something raw, something fragile. That frightful truth made her shudder with unease, like she had just stepped too far into the dark. A knock on the door cut through her spiraling thoughts, sharp and sudden. Elendra flinched, a tension knotting in her chest. "Elendra." Valen's voice came through the thick wood of the door, familiar and strong, but laced with something she hadn't quite heard before, a raw edge, one that held an unspoken warning. She drew in a steadying breath before rising to answer. The hem of her nightgown brushed against the cool stone floor as she crossed the room. She could feel her pulse thrumming in her throat, pounding with anticipation. She opened the door to reveal Valen, tall and composed as always. But there was something different about him tonight. His normally calm, unshakable presence felt a broken bar heavy. He looked at her with eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched tightly as if holding back a storm. "May I come in?" His voice was sharper than usual, and Elendra couldn't help but notice the subtle tremor in it, a kind of barely contained frustration. She stepped aside without a word, her heart suddenly sinking into her chest. She couldn't quite explain why, but something about Valen's approach made her feel as though she was standing at the edge of a precipice, staring down into the unknown. Valen entered without waiting for a response, his boots clicking softly against the floor. His gaze swept the room with the intensity of a man on a mission, then fixed on her, his eyes burning with some silent urgency. "I saw him today," he said, the words coming out heavy, like stones dropped into water. She didn't need to ask who. The answer was already written in the sharpness of his tone. Valen continued, his voice low and dark, like the growl of thunder in the distance. "He's dangerous. He twists truths, Elendra, turns weaknesses into trust, and trust into weapons. You know what he is." Elendra's eyes flickered toward the window, her gaze distant, unfocused. The night outside seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. She wasn't sure why, but his words felt hollow, as though they carried no weight against the storm brewing within her. "Do I?" she murmured softly, her voice a quiet thread in the thick air between them. The words hung heavy in the space, and Valen fell silent. His eyes darkened with warning, his posture straightening as if bracing for a storm. "I need you to promise me something." She stiffened involuntarily, her shoulders tensing beneath the weight of the moment. There was a quiet pressure in his voice, like an iron vice slowly tightening around her chest. "Stay away from him," Valen demanded, his voice now harsh, like a command wrapped in desperation. The words should have been easy to accept, shouldn't they? The right thing to do would be to promise him that she would stay away from that she would remain loyal to the hero who had always stood by her side, who had loved her in his own way. But something in her chest twisted with a strange, tight feeling. She hesitated, and that hesitation felt like an eternity. Broken bar Elendra started, but no words followed. The truth felt caught in her throat. She remembered Kael's voice, silky smooth, cutting through her doubts. "You think she belongs to you, don't you?" The whisper lingered in her mind, like a forbidden truth, and she closed her eyes tightly against it. Her heart raced as she struggled to push the words aside, but they clung to her like an invisible weight. Valen stepped closer, his eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Elendra saw the crack in his armor, the vulnerability hidden beneath his heroism. "Elendra broken bar." His voice was softer now, but still threaded with that edge of urgency. "Promise me you'll stay away from him." "I can't." A broken bar. "I can't lose you to him." But that was the problem, wasn't it? She wasn't sure anymore who she was losing herself to. Instead of answering, she wrapped her arms around herself, the cold air brushing against her skin, her breath quickening. "I'm tired, Valen. We'll talk tomorrow when things are clearer." Valen's eyes searched her face, trying to see the truth in the shadows of her silence. "Just promise me." "Tomorrow," she said again, her voice firmer now, though she could still hear the unspoken question hanging in her tone. Valen looked at her for a long moment, his gaze searching, as if trying to decipher the truth behind her eyes. He hesitated, his shoulders stiff, before he turned and walked away without another word. The door clicked softly behind him, and Elendra was left in the stillness, the storm of her thoughts crashing inside her mind. The room felt colder now, as though Valen's presence had carried with it a strange warmth that had been extinguished. She stood motionless, her hands trembling slightly as they clenched into fists at her sides. Why had she hesitated? The question lingered in the air, unanswered. Elsewhere in Lorien's keep, a different storm was brewing. Kael stood at the window of his private tower chamber, staring out at the moonlit courtyard below. The wind had picked up, whispering through the trees, carrying the scent of fall and the promise of change. His crimson eyes gleamed in the dim light, his expression calm and unreadable, as though he could see far beyond the stone walls and into the future itself. Behind him, a figure stepped from the shadows, a cloaked agent, silent and fluid, as though they had never truly been that to begin with. "Report," Kael commanded, his voice smooth and deliberate, tinged with a quiet power that brooked no delay. The agent bowed low, speaking in a voice barely more than a whisper. "As you foretold, my lord." "The fracture deepens." Kael did not turn, but his lips curved into a knowing smile. And the hero, shaken but still standing. Kael's smile widened slightly. For now. The informant hesitated before continuing, a momentary pause stretching between them. The lady a broken bar. She hesitated, too. Kael's smile faltered only for a moment, then returned, sharper, colder, like a predator toying with its prey. She did not give him what he asked. That made Kael turn, his crimson gaze burning with something far more dangerous than before. He stepped forward, his voice low and almost a whisper. Say that again. She did not promise him, the informant repeated, his voice almost reverent. A dangerous silence settled over the room as Kael's smile grew, a sharp edge to it, as though he had just uncovered a hidden treasure. Aha, broken bar, he murmured softly, his voice silk-wrapped in steel. Elendra. His eyes gleamed, and for a moment, it seemed as though he could already see the outcome. You've begun to question. He turned back to the window, his fingers brushing the chilled glass as though caressing fate itself. It's only a matter of time, now, he whispered, a cruel edge to his words. Soon, she would stop questioning Hema and start questioning the hero she had always believed in. The moon hovered high over the vast expanse of the Solaris kingdom, its silver light spilling down over the royal gardens like a divine spotlight cast upon the sins of the world. Roses shivered in the night air, their delicate petals trembling in time with the pulse of something darker, something more dangerous hidden just beneath the surface. The scent of their perfume mingled with the crisp autumn breeze, filling the space with an almost ethereal, heady fragrance. The castle loomed in the distance, towering above the earth, its spires rising like the hands of the gods, reaching for power, for eternity. Yet, beneath the ancient stone walls, a far more intimate battle raged. Elendra Valkrest wasn't supposed to be here. Wrapped tightly in a sapphire cloak, her golden hair shimmering in the moonlight like threads of molten flame, she stood half-concealed beneath a flowering arch, the petals of the vines above her gently swaying in the cold night breeze. The weight of her thoughts pressed down on her chest, her fingers trembling beneath the fabric of her cloak. Her mind was a battlefield of conflict, of memories, of promises. She had sworn to herself she wouldn't come here to resist the pull of temptation, to turn away from him, to silence the voice inside her that whispered his name at every waking moment. Yet here she was. And, in this quiet garden bathed in moonlight, she found herself standing before him. Claudan. The man she was supposed to hate, to fear, to fight against. The man who made her question everything she had ever believed in. The man who made her feel something deeper than she had ever allowed herself to experience. Something raw, something untamed, something dangerous. He was standing near the fountain, the flickering torchlight casting wicked shadows across his face, making him seem both otherworldly and infinitely human at once. His posture was relaxed, casual, but there was a quiet power in Hema, an almost magnetic aura that pulled at the very fabric of the world around them. Gone was the mask of anonymity that he wore so well. Now, he wore his power like silk, effortlessly, regally, and far too fitting for someone like him. Kael turned his head slowly, as though sensing her presence before she even moved. His eyes so dark, fathomless, and unreadably met hers with a knowing gleam, and his lips curled into a slow, almost predatory smile. Tell me, he said, his voice like velvet over steel, why are you here? Her throat tightened. The words were stuck in her chest, suffocating her. She couldn't answer him. She couldn't even form the thoughts to explain the storm that raged inside her. Yeah, broken bar. She forced her gaze downward, unable to meet his eyes for more than a second. I don't know. Kael stepped closer, his movements fluid, almost imperceptibly like a predator drawing nearer to its prey. But there was no threat in his proximity, only the undeniable pull of something darker and far more dangerous. He didn't touch her, not yet. But she could feel the gravity of him in the air between them, like a storm ready to break. You don't know. His voice was amused, yet there was something deeper beneath it. A certainty, an expectation. Then allow me to remind you. His hand lifted, not to claim, but to beckon. His fingers brushed against her chin, gentle but firm, coaxing her to look up at him. And she did. Against her better judgment, against every instinct telling her to step back, she raised her gaze to meet his. What she saw in his eyes wasn't lust. It wasn't even conquest. It was recognition. You feel it, he whispered, his voice sliding into her soul like the sharp edge of a blade. The hollowness when you're with him. The weight of being someone else's ideal, instead of your own truth. Her breath caught in her throat, the words striking her like a physical blow. She wanted to deny them, to push them away, but something inside her shifted. A crack, barely noticeable, but deep enough to send a ripple of doubt through her. She felt the truth of his words in her chest, in the hollow space inside her that had always been filled with duty, with obligation, with the weight of other people's expectations. "No," she whispered, the word a lie, a desperate defense. "No, you're wrong." Kael's eyes darkened, but not with anger. No, his expression was something far more dangerous, a pity. A quiet, knowing pity. "He loves the idea of you," he said softly, his voice like honey, like velvet, but sharp enough to cut through her resolve. "The light you represent." "But he's never seen your shadows." "Has he?" Elendra flinched. The words dug into her like daggers, striking the deepest, most vulnerable parts of her. She wanted to turn away, to flee, to find safety in the arms of the man she had promised herself she would be with. But there was something in Kael's eyes that made it impossible to lie to herself. She swallowed the lump in her throat, unable to finish the thought. The words were on the tip of her tongue, but they were too raw, too real. She didn't want to admit the truth, not even to herself. Kael moved closer, so close now she could feel the heat of his body, the magnetic pull between them. His hand brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, and she didn't recoil. She should have. She knew she should have, but she didn't. "You're afraid of what I make you feel," Kael murmured, his voice dropping, sending shivers down her spine. "Because it's real, because it's yours, and because it doesn't fit inside the little box they've placed you in." Her heart pounded, each beat a drum of warning, of desire, of confusion. "Stop," she whispered, her voice breaking in a plea, but even to her own ears, it sounded like she didn't mean it. It sounded more like a cry for help, a cry for release, for freedom from the chains that had held her for so long. Kael didn't stop. Instead, he leaned in, his breath warm against her ear, his voice like a promise. "Say it like you mean it," he murmured, his tone low and dangerous. "And I will." Her mind spun, a cyclone of conflicting emotions, but her body broken bar her body betrayed her. She didn't want him to stop, she didn't want to feel like this, but she did. She didn't want him, but the truth was undeniable. She couldn't say it. She couldn't make the words come out because she didn't want him to stop. Kael pulled back slightly, giving her space here, but only enough to allow her to breathe, to think, to doubt. And that was when she did it. Without thinking, without warning, her hand shot forward, seizing his wrist, and not gently, not accidentally, but with a force that shocked them both. Kael froze, his entire body going still, and for the first time since their meeting, a flicker of surprise crossed his face. "Elendra," he said, his voice a low caress, almost a whisper. She didn't know why she stopped him. She didn't know why she reached out and touched him, why she held him in place like she had some claim to him. She only knew that in that moment, when he turned away from her, it felt as though something inside her had ripped open. And now, with her hand on his wrist, she couldn't let go. She didn't want to let go. Kael took a step forward, closing the gap between them with a predatory grace, and in that moment, Elendra knew there was no going back. His hand slid along her jaw, his fingers gentle but firm, tilting her face upward to meet him once more. When Kael kissed her, it was not with the frantic urgency she had expected, not with the hunger that she feared. It was slow, patient, terrifyingly sure, and when she didn't pull a wire, when she didn't stop he deepened it. The kiss was consuming, like wildfire devouring everything in its path. She could feel his control, the careful mastery of each movement, each touch. He was taking from her, but she was giving freely. The warmth of his lips on hers felt like an eternity, and with every second that passed, she lost more of herself to him. It was inevitable, this descent. It was a surrender she hadn't known she was capable of. Her chains didn't break. They melted, and in that moment, she realized she didn't want them to break. She didn't want to be free. The night was unnaturally still, an oppressive silence pressing down on Solaris, as if the very air had been stilled in anticipation of something inevitable. Not a single whisper of wind stirred the branches, and even the leaves that should have rustled in the cool night stood still, as if holding their breath. The stars above seemed to watch with an intensity that bordered on judgment, casting their cold, distant light over the kingdom. Even the moon hung high in the heavens, its argent glow bathing the land below in a silvery sheen that felt less like light and more like a divine spotlight shining on a sinner who was about to be caught. Elendra Valkrest's heart beat loudly in her chest, each thud louder than the last as she walked the cobbled path back to the castle. Her footsteps were measured, but they wavered, betraying the storm inside her. Her body moved with practiced grace, but every step seemed heavy, weighed down by the memory of a kiss that lingered far too long, too dangerously, in her thoughts. Her lips still tingled with the taste of him. She could still feel the brush of his fingers, the intensity in his eyes, the way his presence had filled the air around her, making it impossible to breathe without wanting more. She could still hear the soft, almost mocking note in his voice as he spoke to her, as if he had known all along what would happen, what she would do. What had she done? Elendra clenched her fingers tightly around the edges of her cloak, her knuckles turning white, though it did little to ease the trembling in her hands. She had never been one to give in to impulsive desires. She was a woman of duty, of honor, trained to be poised, to be perfect, to be everything that was expected of her. A future queen, a promised bride, a noble woman whose every action was a testament to the ideals of her kingdom. Not someone who would lose herself in the kiss of her enemy. Not someone who would tremble when she remembered the sound of his voice calling her name, the way his touch had made her feel alive in a way she had never experienced with Aron. The way it had felt as if something inside her, or something buried deeper, had begun to awaken. But worse than the act itself was the truth that followed it like a shadow, too heavy to ignore. She wanted it. She had wanted him. That was the part that shook her, the terrifying, undeniable truth that twisted her insides. She had wanted him. She, who had always prided herself on her loyalty, her commitment, her dedication to her duty. A broken bar now, she had been consumed by the pull of a man she knew could destroy everything she had ever known. And yet a broken bar, it hadn't felt wrong. It had felt real. For the first time in her life, it had felt like she had done something for herself, not for the kingdom, not for Aron, not for anyone but her. But that was the dangerous thought, because it made her question everything. The grand gates of the castle loomed before her, rising from the stone like a looming specter. Dark steel, cold and unyielding, carved with intricate symbols that spoke of ancient power and old, unbroken traditions. Two silver-clad sentinels stood at attention, their faces hidden behind the polished masks of warriors who had never known doubt. Yet even behind those impassive masks, she could feel their eyes on her as she passed, their judgment weighing her every step. The silent whispers that followed her along the path felt more like accusations than greetings. Elendra lifted her chin, her expression smoothing into a mask of porcelain calm. She was the daughter of House Valkrest. She was the fiancée tilde copyright E of the hero. She was the shining light of Solaris, and she would not let anyone see the cracks in that far A tilde section aid. Not even herself. The mask slid into place, a shield she had worn for years of protecting her, hiding her from the truth of what she had become. But as she passed beneath the arches and entered the cold stone corridors of the castle, one question echoed in her mind, louder than all the others. Was she still his? Elsewhere, in the war council chamber, a broken bar, Aron Starfire sat alone beneath the flickering light of a chandelier, shadows creeping across the stone walls like whispered doubts that followed him even in the stillness. His broad, scarred hands lay flat against the table before him, hands that had been the instruments of war, of victory. Hands that had once held Elendra in the safety of his arms, carrying her across rivers when they were children, lifting her with ease when she was tired from a long day of practice. But tonight, those hands were still, useless. He stared down at the map spread across the table, the inked lines marking borders, alliances, and the shifting tides of war that loomed just beyond the horizon. The empire of Thulgris was stirring, its armies rising from the east like a storm, and the drums of war were echoing from beyond the borders. He should have been focused on that, should have been focused on anything but her. He couldn't pinpoint it, but something was wrong. Annoying, insistent feeling tugged at the edges of his mind, but it was elusive, slipping away every time he tried to grab hold of it. Elendra had smiled at him this morning, her words sweet and familiar, but her eyes had been distant, hollow. She had said everything she needed to say, but there had been a veil over her that he hadn't been able to pierce, no matter how hard he tried. And that terrified him more than any battle he had ever fought. His golden gaze dropped from the map to the scattered papers before him, to the weapons and strategies that would decide the fate of the kingdom. But he couldn't bring himself to focus on them. Had he lost her? The thought clawed at him too sharp, too closely, and he forced his hands into fists, the nails biting into his palms, as if he could squeeze the thought away. He had no time for doubts. Not now, not with war on the horizon. He was Aron Starfire, the hero of Solaris. He could not afford weakness. Not now, not ever. But the question lingered, unrelenting, a constant pressure in his chest. Had he lost her? In Kael's private chambers, a broken bar. The crackling of a crimson fire filled the silence of the room, casting long shadows across the stone walls, their shapes twisting like tendrils of smoke reaching for something they could never grasp. Cladon leaned back in his high-backed chair, the firelight playing across his face in flickering golds and reds, his expression one of detached amusement. In his hand, a goblet of rich wine swirled lazily, the liquid catching the light like liquid fire. His fingers traced the rim slowly, absently, as his mind wandered. Tonight had been a broken bar fruitful. Elendra Valkrest had been more pliable than he'd anticipated. Her resistance had cracked, splintered beneath the pressure of his touch. The walls she had so carefully constructed around herself had faltered for just a moment, but that was all it took. One kiss, one touch, and she had stopped him, grabbed him. The memory of her fingers tightening around his wrist sent a shiver of satisfaction through him. Her hesitation had been clear, but so had the longing that followed it. That was the moment the first fracture had appeared. A small crack, perhaps, but cracks always grew. Kael took another slow sip of wine, savoring its warmth. As he turned his gaze toward the open window, the night stretched out before him, vast and infinite, and beyond it, he knew, the hero of Solaris was grappling with doubts. Elendra was slipping. Slowly, but surely, she would return to him. Kael didn't need to hurry. He didn't need to rush. The best seductions were slow burns, psychological games that worked their way into the soul until there was no escaping them. And Kael knew one thing above all else: Elendra would come to him. Not in spite of the guilt she felt, but because of it. Because every time she looked at him, the world would shift a little more, and the memories of her promises would fade. She would doubt. She would question. And when the time came, she would seek him not as an enemy, but as the only truth left in her world. And when that time came, a broken bar, Kael would be ready to catch her, to make her his. The first rays of dawn bled over Solaris, flooding the royal chambers with a golden light that painted the walls in shades of warmth. Outside the palace, the city began to stir, the bustle of morning a stark contrast to the stillness within the castle walls. But in the heart of the palace, there was no warmth, no salvation, only silence, only guilt. Elendra Valkrest sat motionless before her vanity, staring into the reflection that barely resembled the woman she knew herself to be. Her golden hair cascaded over her shoulders in perfect waves, each strand catching the light as if trying to defy the heaviness that clung to the air. Her royal gown finely crafted, rich in color, every detail immaculate should have made her feel proud, regal. But the illusion of perfection was fragile, cracking along the edges. Last night lingered beneath her skin like a fever she couldn't shake, a fever she didn't want to shake. Her fingertips hovered at her lips, recalling the heat of Kael's kiss. It hadn't been violent, aggressive. It had been soft, deliberate, a calm before a storm that had yet to fully break. But that kiss, that touch, had left a mark deeper than she could have imagined. She hadn't just allowed it. She had wanted it. The craving she felt, the desire that had caught her off guard, sent a chill down her spine. A whisper echoed in her mind, still laced with Kael's voice, the words burning with dangerous allure: one taste of sin, and you'll never crave virtue again. At the time, she dismissed it as arrogance, as the idle boast of a man who believed he could manipulate anyone. But now, as she sat alone in the pale morning light, doubt gnawed at her. Was he right? Was he right about her? Her fingers trembled as they traced the curve of her lips, memories of Kael's touch flooding her senses. She wanted to scream, to break free from the feeling, but the more she tried to suppress it, the stronger it grew. Was she so easily swayed? Was she so weak? A knock at the door broke through her spiraling thoughts like a blade slicing through the thick fog of her confusion. "Come in," she said, her voice steady, but hollow. The mask of royalty slid back into place, the practiced calmness settling over her features like armor. If only the same could be said for her heart. The door creaked open, and there, standing in the threshold, was Aaron Starfire, her hero, her fiancé tilde copyright. The man she had pledged her heart to. The man she had spent her entire life preparing to marry. He was everything she had ever been taught to want. Strong, noble, his golden armor gleaming in the morning light, his expression one of concern for her. But to Elendra, it felt like a foreign thing, something she could no longer quite reach. "You didn't return last night," he said quietly, his gaze studying her, a mix of worry and confusion crossing his features. Her breath faltered, her chest tightening at the sound of his voice. "I needed time," she said, forcing herself to speak as if nothing was amiss. "Yeah, Broken Bar couldn't sleep." Aaron took a step forward, his golden eyes searching her face with a quiet intensity. "You've been distant," he remarked, his voice thick with concern. "Is something wrong?" "Everything is wrong," she thought. But the words died on her tongue. She could would not speak them. "Not to him." "Not now." "I'm just overwhelmed," she said, forcing her tone to remain light, as though the weight of the world didn't sit heavy on her shoulders. "There's so much broken bar pressure, expectations, war." A broken bar. She trailed off, her eyes shifting to the window, as if the sight of the sunlight on the horizon could somehow wash away the conflict inside her. Aaron, ever perceptive, reached out and took her hand. His touch, once comforting, now felt foreign. The warmth of his palm, the strength of his grip, should have eased the storm inside her. Instead, it only made her feel more lost. Her fingers pulled away before she could stop them, her heart hammering in her chest. Aaron's expression faltered for a moment, the warmth in his eyes cooling, replaced with something darker: a hurt, frustration. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. "It's cool, isn't it?" he asked, his voice low, a trace of bitterness creeping into the words. Her heart shipped. Her gaze snapped to him, her breath caught in her throat. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. How did he know? How much had he seen? Aaron's voice dropped even lower, his suspicion now clear. "I've seen the way he looks at you, the way he tries to manipulate you." Elendra could only look at him, her mind spinning. "You haven't seen the way I look back." She wanted to say it, to shout it, but the words caught in her throat. The fear of the guilt strangled her. Instead, she turned to the window, unable to meet his gaze any longer. "He's a manipulator, yes. But I know my duty," she said, the words falling from her lips like brittle glass, each one shattering as it left her mouth. Aaron moved behind her, his hand brushing lightly against her shoulder, his voice soft, almost pleading. "I know you won't fail me, Elendra." His tone was gentle, but the weight of his words, the desperation to pull her back to him, made her ache. But it wasn't Aaron she longed for, not in the way she needed. And she hated herself for it. Hated herself for how easily she had been swayed, for how badly she wanted something she knew she shouldn't. "But I already have," she thought, her eyes closing against the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. If he knew, or if he saw what had passed between her and Kael, would he still look at her the same way? Would she? Elsewhere, in Kael's chambers, Cladon sat by the hearth, his legs stretched out before him, the crimson fire casting an eerie glow across his features. His goblet, filled with the finest wine, was in his hand, but he wasn't focused on the drink. His thoughts lingered on Elendra. She had kissed him. Hesitant, trembling, but she had kissed him. And now, guilt was already eating her alive. Perfect. Guilt was a slow poison. It worked its way into the soul, a silent force that corroded certainty, melted loyalty, and made saints out of sinners long before they realized they had fallen. It would break her. He didn't need to seduce her again. He didn't need to chase her. He only needed to wait. He only needed to let her sink into the hollowness of her own purity, let her compare the hero's sacred love to the hunger that burned in Kael's touch. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie, the sound pulling him back to the present. "My lord," a servant said, bowing low. "The War Council requests your presence." Yes, the war. It was a distraction, a game for the generals. They would argue over strategy, over alliances, over borders. But Kael knew the real battlefield. The real war was waged in the heart of a woman, and Elendra Valkrest was already bleeding. With a slow, calculated smile, Kael set the goblet aside and stood, adjusting the folds of his tunic. He had already won. The rest was only a matter of time. Ivory Bastion ate out in golden light. The rising sun bathed the Ivory Bastion in its golden light, the gleam of the tower's high spires piercing the sky like a beacon to the heavens. Archon's starfire stood atop the fortress, his hands gripping the cold stone balustrade with a quiet intensity, his breath hanging in the crisp morning air. Below, the city of Solaris stretched out, vast and radiant, a land of magic and the marble that thrived in the warmth of its golden dawn. But for Archon, the beauty of the scene seemed somehow distant, muted by the storm brewing in his heart. A soft ring of distant bells echoed through the air, the faint hum of the kingdom's daily rituals, unaware of the weight of change. The people continued with their lives, oblivious to the cracks that had begun to splinter the very foundation of their world. But Archon felt them. He felt them like the press of an iron weight on his chest. Something was wrong. It wasn't a simple suspicion anymore, it was certainty. Archon's thoughts churned, tightening around him like a vice. The last several days had been a blur, but in that blur, one thing had become undeniable: Cladon. The man's presence had unsettled the entire court, shifting the balance of power with ease. He spoke like a noble, moved with the grace of an aristocrat, but there was something beneath that veneer. Something darker, something unfathomable. Kael had no history, no legacy. He had simply appeared like a storm that arrived without warning, and now, the winds were changing. And Elendra broken bar. Archon's grip on the stone tightened, his knuckles pale beneath the weight of his emotions. He had been watching her closely. The woman he had loved for so long, his betrothed, the very embodiment of grace and strength, had changed in subtle ways. It was the small things at first, a hesitation before she smiled, the way her laughter no longer held the warmth it once did. And now, more than ever, her touch, once electric, now trembled with a distance that Archon couldn't ignore. He closed his eyes and exhaled sharply. He knew why. It was Kael. That vile, shadowed man had come between them. And now, Elendra was slipping from his grasp, her heart turning towards someone else. Archon's pulse quickened, his heart pounding in his chest as anger boiled within him. But beneath that fury, there was another, more painful feeling creeping in: a betrayal. Had she allowed it? Had she betrayed him, even if just in her heart? No, he muttered fiercely, shaking his head. She wouldn't. She's stronger than that. She won't fall for his games. But even as the words left his mouth, doubt seeped into his soul, whispering dark thoughts that he couldn't shake. And in that moment, standing on the edge of the world, Archon realized something that terrified him. The trust he had placed in Elendra was already beginning to crumble. Close quarters as the game begins. Inside his chambers, the shadows were thick, yet the air hummed with the subtle tension of anticipation. Cladon reclined lazily in a chair, the faint flicker of candlelight casting dancing shadows across the room. His fingers idly traced the rim of a goblet, swirling the dark crimson liquid inside with careful precision, as though savoring every drop. The taste of victory lingered on his tongue, a sweetness that was far richer than any wine could provide. Last night, Elendra had kissed him. It had been hesitant, a brush of lips that trembled with uncertainty, but it had been enough to show her heart's true weakness, enough to ignite a fire that he had been fanning ever since. He could still feel the lingering heat of her against him, the desperate pull of her body as she had kissed him, as if she had been searching for something, a broken bar or someone. And she had found him. Desire. That was what had blossomed between them, hidden beneath layers of guilt and shame, but it had blossomed nonetheless. And guilt was a powerful thing. It didn't take long for it to twist the heart into something unrecognizable. Kael smiled softly to himself. He didn't need to push any further. Elendra was already unraveling. Her mind was slowly being consumed by her own desires, her loyalties slipping like sand through her fingers. The more she struggled against the temptation, the more she gave in. He didn't need to seduce her again, not tonight. He simply needed to wait. Let her guilt turn her against her own convictions. Let it fester inside her, gnawing at the fragile walls she had built around herself. It wouldn't be long before she would crave him again, and this time, she would be the one to seek him out. A knock at the door shattered his thoughts. "My lord," a servant called from the other side. "The War Council requests your presence." Kael set down his goblet, wiping the wine from his lips as he rose with a fluid grace. His lips curved into a smile, though it was devoid of warmth. The war was an afterthought. The generals could argue over strategies and tactics for as long as they wished. He had more important matters to attend to. The game of power had already begun, and Elendra was but one of many pieces in play. Kael's quarters. Aaron's confrontation. The door to Kael's chambers creaked open, and in strode Aaron Starfire, the very image of a hero forged from golden light. His armor gleamed, every piece meticulously polished, yet his expression was clouded with a storm of his own making. His posture was rigid, his jaw set with an intensity that would have crushed anyone else. But Kael merely regarded him with mild interest, setting his goblet aside. He had known this confrontation was inevitable. Aaron's voice was low, simmering with barely contained rage. "I'm not here for games." Clutched a brow, a teasing smile tugging at his lips. "Then why are you here, hero?" Aaron's hand clenched at his side. "Stay away from Elendra." Kael's lips curled further, his eyes gleaming with dark amusement. "Ah, so, this is personal." "She's slipping away." Aaron's voice broke, raw with emotion. "She's afraid." "She's confused, and it all started the moment you arrived." Kael allowed his gaze to sharpen, the words hitting their mark. But he said nothing. "Stop toying with her," Aaron growled, stepping forward. "She's not some pawn in your twisted game." Kael leaned in slightly, his voice soft as silk. "Isn't she? Or perhaps a broken bar? She's simply tired of being a piece on your board." Aaron's breath caught in his chest, fury flaring in his chest. "You're manipulating her." "If I am," Kael whispered, his voice cool and deadly, "then you've already lost." The words struck like a blow to the chest. Aaron's grip on Kael's collar tightened, slamming him against the stone wall. The force rattled the room, shaking the very foundation of their rivalry. Their faces were inches apart, fire against ice, the clash of their wills palpable in the air. "Touch her again," Aaron hissed, "and I will end you." Kael's lips twisted into a smile, though there was no warmth in it. He laughed softly, the sound low and mocking. "I already have." Aaron's grip faltered. For just a second, doubt slipped into his chest like a cold knife, and Kael seized the moment, leaning in close enough for their breaths to mingle. "If her heart was yours," Kael said in a cold whisper, "I would never have had the chance." The words burned Aaron like acid. His rage surged again, but beneath it, there was something else, a deep, gnawing terror, because deep down, he knew Kael wasn't lying. Elendra was slipping away from him, and he didn't know how to stop it. Aaron shoved Kael back with a growl, spinning on his heel and storming out of the room, his heart thundering in his chest. The door slammed shut behind him, but Kael remained unmoved, sipping his wine with the satisfaction of a man who knew the game was already won. Palace Gardens. Elendra's fall. Elendra sat among the silver roses in the palace gardens, the delicate petals trembling in the soft morning breeze. The garden was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. But Elendra was far from still. Her thoughts were scattered, torn between the past and the present, between the promises of a future with Aaron and the dark pool of desire she had never anticipated. She had listened to Aaron's plea. She had heard his words, his heart laid bare before her. He had reminded her of their shared childhood dreams, the sacred vows they had once sworn. But even as he spoke, her mind was elsewhere. Her body had already betrayed her. Aaron's voice, no matter how full of love, had no hold on her heart anymore, because it was Kael who consumed her thoughts. The taste of sin, the heat of his kiss, those were the things that lingered in her blood, that burned in her veins. She could still feel the way his lips had touched hers, the way his breath had whispered against her skin. She had tried to bury it, to deny it, but it clawed at her from the inside. And yet, even in her shame, her hands ached to feel him again. "This isn't me," she whispered to herself. "I'm stronger than this." But her voice trembled, and the words felt hollow. A shadow fell across her. She looked up, her heart racing. Kael stood before her, his presence like a weight on her chest. He was dressed in his signature midnight coat, his dark eyes gleaming with an unreadable expression. "You look troubled, my lady," he said, his voice smooth like velvet. She rose slowly, feeling the heat of his gaze, the pull of his aura wrapping around her like tendrils. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then tell me to leave," Kael murmured. She stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. The words refused to come. She should have told him to leave. She should have told him that everything about him was wrong, that he was a threat to everything she held dear. But the silence between them grew, and her heart spoke a different truth. "You're ruining me," she whispered. Kael took a step closer, his fingers brushing lightly over her cheek. His touch was maddeningly tender, gentle in a way that belied the storm inside her. "I'm setting you free," he whispered back. His lips brushed against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "Tell me to go." She should have shouted it. But as the words died in her throat, she knew she couldn't. Silence fell between them, thick and heavy, and as Kael disappeared into the shadows, Elendra sank back onto the bench, trembling, her heart torn between guilt and desire. She had crossed the line. There was no going back. Aron Starfire's breath came in ragged gasps, his fists dripping blood. His knuckles, raw and bruised, clenched and unclenched in a rhythmic motion, but the pain in his body barely registered. His mind, sharp and unforgiving, was consumed by something far more excruciating. The royal training hall around him was a scene of chaos. Shattered dummies hung limply, their hay-stuffed bodies punctured by the force of his blows. Torn sandbags littered the floor, their contents spilling out in a disorganized heap. It was as if the destruction around him could somehow match the devastation inside. The walls echoed with the sounds of his desperation, a sound of a man who was breaking, piece by piece. His golden armor, once a shining testament to his status as the Empire's champion, now lay discarded in the corner, its surface scratched and dented from the violent training session. Aron had struck until his bones screamed, until the ache in his muscles drowned out all thoughts of strategy, of duty. He had been the unbreakable one, the golden son of Solaris, chosen by the gods themselves to lead the Empire's charge. But Cladon had shattered him. It wasn't the blade, it wasn't the steel, that had broken him. No, Kael had found his weakness, not with force but with whispers, with words, with the cold truth of a man who understood how to unravel a soul. The darkness of Kael's presence had seeped into his life like a slow poison, corrupting the foundation of everything he thought he understood. Elendra. She was slipping from his grasp, and no matter how hard he fought, no matter how fiercely he trained or how many blows he struck against the sandbags, he couldn't stop it. She was slipping through his fingers like sand, her warmth fading from his life as Kael stepped further into her world. The thought gnawed at his heart. It consumed him. What had happened to the woman he once knew? To the Elendra who had been a beacon of light and hope in his life? The Elendra who had laughed with him, who had shared her dreams and sorrows with him? Now, all that was left was a shadow of the woman he had once known. A shadow who, every time he looked into her eyes, seemed to be slipping further away from him. He couldn't stop it. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop it. And what hurt even more was that he knew it wasn't just Kael's doing. Elendra was allowing it. The thought stung worse than any wound he'd ever received, worse than any battle he had fought, worse than any sword that had ever pierced his flesh. He was losing her. A knock broke him from his spiraling thoughts. Aron stood frozen in the center of the training hall, his breathing steadying as his fists slowly uncurled. The door creaked open, and there she was, Elendra. Her face was pale, her eyes distant, as if she too were fighting battles in her mind. He could see it in the way she held herself, the way her shoulders were hunched, as if weighed down by some unseen burden. She wasn't the radiant, confident woman he had known. She wasn't the Elendra he had promised himself to. She was someone else, someone broken, someone lost. She opened her mouth, as if to speak, but the words didn't come. Aron didn't wait for her to say anything. He could see the internal conflict warring behind her eyes, and the thought of that silent struggle of her hesitation drove him mad. Elendra broken bar. His voice was strained, hoarse from the hours of rage and despair that had been building inside him. "Please, talk to me." He took a step toward her, reaching out with trembling hands, but she took a step back. The space between them seemed to grow, and his heart broke a little more with every inch. "Tell me what happened to us," Archon begged, his voice breaking. "We were supposed to be together. We promised." Her eyes flickered with pain, but she didn't respond. She didn't move, didn't even look at him fully. "I love you," Archon continued, his words laced with desperation. "Gods, I love you more than I ever thought was possible. Whatever Kael has done, I can undo it. Just say the word. We can leave tonight. We can run away. I can give you everything." The words spilled out of him before he could stop them, like a man drowning in his own helplessness. But Helendra only stood there, her lips trembling, her body quivering with indecision. "Her own a broken bar," she whispered, barely audible. "Yeah, broken bar. I can't." The words hit him like a blow to the chest, knocking the wind from him. He felt the world tilt, the room spinning around him. The pain, the raw agony, was enough to drive him to his knees. For a moment, he was paralyzed, as if the weight of her rejection had crushed the air from his lungs. He stared at Hera, at the woman who had once been his everything, the woman he had vowed to protect, and saw only emptiness. A long silence stretched between them, a gaping wound neither could heal. Helendra didn't move. She didn't take a step toward him. She didn't chase him. Archon didn't know what hurt more, the fact that she had said those words, or the fact that he knew she meant them. He stood, numb, unable to speak. His body felt like it had turned to stone, his heart cold and hollow in his chest. The woman he loved, his Helendra, had chosen Kael, and there was nothing he could do to change that. Before he could move, before he could find the strength to leave, a shadow stirred behind them. It was a presence so dark, so powerful, that it felt like the very air around him thickened. Archon didn't need to turn to know that Kael stood there, watching, waiting. His presence filled the space between them, suffocating and suffused with an insidious confidence. Kael had seen the truth before Archon had even fully realized it. Helendra was his. The moment stretched into eternity as Kael stepped into the moonlight, his eyes glimmering like pools of onyx, predatory and sharp. He took a slow, deliberate sip from his goblet, the wine swirling in the dim light, savoring the vintage as though it were the last taste of something sweet before the bitter truth consumed everything. Archon's heart twisted in his chest. "Heroes," Kael murmured, his voice carrying the weight of amusement and cruel truth. "Always so sure of their purpose, so sure of their place in the world." He tilted the goblet in his hand, swirling the dark liquid, his smile widening as he locked eyes with Archon. "They think they can save everyone. They think they can fix the broken." Archon's fist clenched, but Kael's words held him in place, as if the very weight of them were enough to keep him immobile. "But some people don't want to be saved," Kael continued, his voice a soft murmur that cut through the night like silk wrapped around steel. "Some people want to be claimed." Archon's breath caught in his throat. He looked at Helendra, who stood beside him, her eyes downcast, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. She wasn't the woman he had known. She wasn't the woman he had loved. No, she had changed. She was Kael's now. And she was willing. Archon's world shattered in that moment. He had lost her. He had lost everything. Kael's smile deepened, predatory and triumphant. He stepped closer to Helendra, his fingers grazing her arm with a chilling tenderness that made Archon's blood boil. "There's no going back now," Kael whispered, his voice low and cruel, his lips curling with dark satisfaction. Helendra turned her head slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear, a tremor running through her body. Archon couldn't watch anymore. He couldn't breathe. He turned and walked away. But as he left, the echo of Kael's final words followed him into the night. The moon hung high over Solaris, a cold, pale orb casting a silvery glow over the sprawling royal gardens. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and moon lilies, their delicate petals glowing faintly in the dark. It was a fragrance once so familiar, so comforting, yet now it felt suffocating, clinging to the night like a memory that refused to fade. Helendra stood beneath the crystal willows, her arms wrapped tightly around her body as if she could shield herself from the invisible storm raging within her. The cool air didn't cause the chill in her bones, no, it was the echo of Archon's voice, still lingering in her mind. "Then choose me." The words had pierced her like a blade, raw and unrelenting. She could still feel the heat of Archon's gaze, the desperation in his eyes as he'd begged her to choose him, to choose love, to choose hope. But the truth was, She had already chosen, and it wasn't him. Her fingers clenched the fabric of her gown, twisting it in her grip. She could feel the weight of the silence that stretched between them. Aaron, broken and pleading, her heart, once so sure, now fractured. He had given her everything. And she had given him nothing. She had stood there, paralyzed by something darker, something that tugged at her soul in ways Aaron's love never could. She had let him go. Not because she didn't care for him, no, she had cared more than she had ever admitted, but because deep down, a terrible, undeniable truth had emerged. Her heart no longer beat for him. A rustle of wind stirred the trees, a soft whisper in the air. The shadows lengthened, darkened, twisting like serpents in the moonlight. Elendra didn't need to look. She felt it, the unmistakable presence, as palpable as the air she breathed. His shadow fell over her, like night itself descending. A shiver ran down her spine, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. "You're trembling, Elendra." His voice, a deep, smooth caress that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. He slipped through her defenses, wrapping around her heart with the ease of a serpent's coil. He was close now, far too close, and she could feel the heat of him, like fire just beyond the edges of her awareness. His presence filled every inch of space, every corner of her mind. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her body was frozen, trapped between the pool of desire and the heavy weight of guilt. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice hoarse and yet a broken bar. His presence moved closer still, his words dropping like velvet. "Here you are," a statement, not a question. And the worst part? He was right. She was here. She had chosen this. The truth, harsh and undeniable, hung between them. She had come here, to him. She had let Aaron walk away, and now, she was standing before the one man who had torn her heart open and remade it in his image. Kael stepped behind her, his breath warm against her neck. Elendra's body reacted before her mind could catch up, a pulse of heat spreading through her chest. She fought against it, tried to remain composed, but her body betrayed her. He reached out, his fingers barely grazing her shoulder, a touch so light it might have been imagined. And yet, it burned. "You let him go," Kael murmured, his voice dripping with a dark satisfaction. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "He was in pain," she whispered, as though that could explain the chasm growing between her and the man she had once loved. And yet a broken bar. His breath ghosted over her ear, his lips curving with cruel amusement. "You didn't follow him." Each word cut deeper, sharper than any blade. Guilt was one thing, but Kael's words twisted the knife, driving it deeper into the fragile remnants of her loyalty. He knew. He always knew. She had come here, to him. She had chosen him, whether she had realized it or not. The moment Aaron had left, the moment she had let him walk away, it had been a choice she hadn't been strong enough to fight. "Say it, Elendra." His voice was low, commanding, and something inside her trembled. She knew what he was asking, and she knew she couldn't refuse him. Not anymore. She clenched her jaw, her fingers digging into her gown as if she could hold herself together. "Say what?" she asked, her voice faltering. "Say that you belong to me." The words fell between them like a spell, thick and heavy, and Elendra felt them seep into her very soul. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat louder than the last. She could hear Aaron's voice in her mind, the pleading, the desperation, the love. But it wasn't enough. Kael's fingers grazed her throat, tilting her chin up, his touch possessive, deliberate. It wasn't rough, no, it was the touch of a sovereign handling something precious, something claimed. His thumb brushed over her skin, just enough to feel the pulse beneath it, quickening with every passing second. "Say it," Kael repeated, his voice a dark whisper, filled with power. "Say that you belong to me." Her breath caught in her throat, tears threatening to spill. The past clung to her like a shroud, but it was a weight she could no longer bear. And then, in a voice barely audible, she whispered the words that had been clawing at her from the inside. "Yeah, broken bar, I belong to you." Kael's smile spread slowly, like the first crack of dawn breaking through the night. It was the smile of a conqueror, of a man who knew he had won. He pulled her into him then, without hesitation, without doubt. The kiss was not gentle, it was claiming, consuming. And in that moment, Elendra shattered not into pieces but into something else entirely. She was his. Entirely, irrevocably. Far below, in the hidden depths of Solaris's royal archives, Aron's starfire sat alone. His armor was discarded beside him, forgotten like the ideals he had once sworn to uphold. The only light was the flickering of a candle, casting long shadows on the pages of an ancient tome. The book was old, its leather cracked with age, and its ink as dark as the despair now seeping into his soul. The title was a cold reminder of his path to reclaim what has been lost. One must sever the wool fate. Let death be the key. Aron stared at the text, his bloodshot eyes unfocused, as through the words on the page spoke to him on a level deeper than mere understanding. They spoke to the rage that had been growing inside him, a fire that could no longer be contained. She chose him. The words echoed in his mind, each one a nail in the coffin of his heart. He had tried to save her, to fight for her, but in the end, she had made her choice. And it hadn't been him. He closed the book with trembling hands, the weight of his grief pressing down on him like an anvil. The gods had failed him. His kingdom had failed him. Love had betrayed him. The anger that had been bubbling beneath the surface now boiled over, a scorching heat that consumed him whole. If he couldn't save her, then he would burn everything to the ground, to claim her, to take her back. And if that meant tearing the world apart in the process, so be it. The great halls of Solaris had once echoed with the vibrancy of life and the warmth of hope. Now, the air was heavy with an unspoken sorrow, the flames that once illuminated the kingdom now flickering weakly, casting long, tortured shadows across the silent streets. Aron sat alone in the hollow throne room, a place that once stood as a beacon of his destiny. His crown, once proudly perched upon his brow, now lay discarded at his feet to an empty symbol of a promise broken. His armor, still stained with the blood of his battles, clung to him like the weight of his own failure. His gauntleted fingers traced absent-mindedly over the stone table before him, where the royal seal of Solarisa, a radiant sun wrapped in chains, was carved with meticulous precision. The symbol had once represented the heart of the kingdom, a promise that no matter how dark the days grew, the sun would rise again. But now, that very emblem mocked him. Elendra had chosen Kael. Not in anger, not in confusion, but with a terrifying clarity that Aron had not anticipated. She had stood before him, once a woman whose heart had been entwined with his own. She had sworn loyalty to him. And yet, in the end, she had turned away. She had chosen the man who had been his rival, his enemy. The weight of that choice crushed him. Every heartbeat since had been a brutal reminder of his failure. He had begged her. He had pleaded for her to stay, to return to the promise they had once made. But her eyes, once filled with love, had shown nothing but the hollow coldness of someone who had already moved on. Aron whispered to the empty room, his voice thick with the anguish of a shattered soul, "I swore to protect her. I swore to be her light." But now, the light had failed her, and the shadow, had claimed her soul in the darkness. Before him, the cursed tome lay open, its presence a strange mix of foreboding and allure. The pages seemed to pulse with a violet glow, the ancient symbols etched across them shifting like living creatures. Words of power, words that had been whispered in the deepest corners of the forgotten realms, now beckoned him. To reclaim what was stolen, one must break the chains of fate. Death shall be the key. Power shall be the price. Aron's fingers hovered over the cursed text, his mind swirling with doubt and rage. The path he had once walked, the honor that had defined him, now seemed irrelevant. What good was honor when it led only to suffering? What good was righteousness when it could not protect the one he loved? He pressed his hand down onto the page. The moment his skin touched the paper, the room seemed to convulse. The air thickened, a tangible darkness spilling from the walls like ink. The chamber itself groaned in protest, and Aron's body tensed as something deep within him shifted. Symbols so arcane and incomprehensibly burned themselves into his arms, winding like living serpents through his skin and into his very soul. Pain lanced through his veins, and yet, he welcomed it. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Aron felt alive. He could feel the power coursing through him, the chains of faith that had bound him for so long beginning to unravel. The world that had once been so clear to him, the world of heroes and villains, light and darker, was now a blurry haze. There was no clear path anymore. Only Thesa, the seductive allure of power, and the promise of vengeance. Aron's eyes narrowed as his body adjusted to the newfound strength. He could hear the whispered words of the tome in his mind, the voice of the magic that now thrummed within him. "You are no longer the chosen," it hissed, its voice dripping with contempt. "You are the condemned." Archon's lips curled into a bitter smile. "I don't need to be chosen." A figure appeared from the shadows, tall and cloaked in black robes adorned with symbols older than even Archon's world. The man's face was obscured, but his presence was undeniably ancient and powerful. He stepped forward with a knowing grin, his eyes gleaming with malicious amusement. "Well done," the figure said, his voice thick with approval. "You've finally chosen the only truth that matters." Archon turned toward him, unstable but burning with the newfound strength that surged within him. His eyes, now bright with the fire of his new power, locked onto the stranger. "Who are you?" Archon demanded, his voice hoarse with both curiosity and suspicion. The man chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down Archon's spine. "Oh, I have many names. But for you, I'll let you call me one thing above all." The figure stepped closer, his dark eyes gleaming with ancient malice, and Archon instinctively raised his hand. Magic crackled at his fingertips, the energy of the tome now dancing through him like fire. "Master," the figure said with a smirk. Archon's heart raced, but his anger surged. "You created Kael?" he asked, his voice like a growl. The man grinned wider, the malice in his eyes growing. "No," he said softly. "I unchained him." The words hit Archon like a hammer. His mind raced as he tried to process the meaning of them. Kael, the one who had taken everything from him, the one who had stolen Elendra's heart, was not simply an enemy. He was a creation, an instrument of someone far more powerful, far more dangerous. Archon's pulse quickened. "Were Broken Bar unchained him?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief and growing rage. The man's grin deepened, and he took another step closer, his presence suffocating. "Kael is nothing more than a tool, Archon," he said softly, almost kindly. "But were Broken Bar, you are something more, something greater." Archon's thoughts spun as the implications settled in. The man before him was no mere ally, no passing figure. He was something ancient, something beyond the realms of men and gods alike. And now, Archon's path had been forever altered. He was no longer the prince, the hero. He was no longer bound by the chains of fate. Now, he was a weapon. The room darkened further, the shadows growing oppressive, and the air hummed with magic. Power, raw and intoxicating, surged through Archon's body. He felt alive, more alive than he had ever been before. But at what cost? The war had changed. This was no longer about love, about Elendra. This was about something far greater. This was about legacy, about power. Arona, the once golden Princia, was no longer here to save the world. He was here to remake it. The Grand Hall of Volthorn Keep was a place carved from shadows and stone, whispering the stories of conquests yet to come. The torches flickered like dying embers, casting long, sinister shadows that clawed at the towering marble pillars. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke and the weight of power yet fully realized. The room was not built to celebrate life, but to house the future of kingdoms, the echo of their triumphs, the traces of their fall. At the far end of the chamber, on an ebony throne crafted from the bones of the old world, Clardant sat. He was not yet a king, but a predator, sharp-eyed, composed, and already feeding on the bones of empires that had long since crumbled. His fingers idly traced the armrest, feeling the cold, unforgiving surface beneath his touch, as though seeking to solidify his dominion over not just the space, but the very future that loomed before him. Before him knelt Commander Edris Varmir, a man whose armor was now tarnished and bloodied, its once glorious sheen dulled by the weight of his failure. His sword, once a symbol of his unshakable commitment to the hero, now hung at his side like a useless thing. His knees pressed into the stone floor, but it was not submission that had brought him there. No, it was restraint to the last, trembling threads of a man who still clung to some semblance of pride, though that pride was quickly slipping away. His heart was heavy, as if weighed down by the sins of betrayal. Kael's gaze never left him as he leaned forward, his voice soft but lethal. It was the kind of voice that made kings tremble and warriors weep. "Tell me, Edris," Kael's words cut through the silence like a blade, "how does it feel to kneel before the man you once swore to destroy?" The words lingered in the air, sharp and knowing. Edris did not immediately respond. His silence was not the quiet of defeat but of a man coming to terms with his place in the world. A warrior who had lost his reason for fighting, standing on the precipice of something much darker. "You've taken my fortress," Edris muttered, his voice low, but there was no surrender in it. But the hero will come. And when he does, Kael rose from the throne with a fluid motion, his cloak billowing out behind him like the wings of some great bird of prey. His boots thudded against the stone, heavy with the weight of a man who had already decided the fate of every soul in the room. He walked down the steps slowly, deliberately, until he stood inches from Edris, his gaze unwavering. He looked down at the kneeling man with something close to amusement in his eyes, though it was a cold, cruel sort of amusement, or one that saw nothing but brokenness in Edris' form. He will come, Kael said, his voice resonating like the calm before a storm, but when he does, he will be broken, hollow, alone. There was a certain venomous calm to his words, a chilling certainty in the way he spoke. He stopped in front of Edris and knelt down, his gloved hand rising to lift the warrior's chin, forcing him to meet his gaze. There was no warmth in Kael's touch, only the cold weight of fate, of inevitability. His greatest strength, Kael continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, was never his sword. It was what he believed he was fighting for. Kael's lips curled into a slow, cruel smile as he straightened, pulling Edris' chin upward as though guiding him to see the world from a perspective that had only just begun to dawn on him. And I will take that from him, Kael whispered, his voice dripping with a darkness that threatened to consume them both. Piece by piece. As the words settled in the air, there was a long, terrible silence. Edris' gaze shifted downward, the fire of defiance still burning in his eyes. But even he knew there was no escaping the web that Kael had spun. Not anymore. In the high chambers of the Obsidian Keep, far from Volthorn's grand hall, Selene Everhart stood at the balcony, gazing out over the vast, shadowy landscape. The wind howled around her, carrying with it the promise of storm. But it wasn't the wind that made her heart race, it was the weight of Kael's presence. She felt him, even from a distance. His influence, his power, wrapping around her like a chain that threatened to tighten with every passing moment. She had not fallen, not yet. But the ground beneath her feet was beginning to feel like it was crumbling. The soft creak of the door behind her brought her back to the present. She didn't need to turn around to know who had entered. Enter, she said, her voice barely a whisper, though it carried a strange, detached command. Kael stepped into the room, his figure a blur of shadows, his presence absolute. He was draped in a dark cloak, the fabric shimmering faintly as though woven from the night itself. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling serenity, as though he knew everything that was happening and everything that would happen. Every thought, every movement, nothing escaped him. Selene stiffened, though she did not turn to face him. She gripped the balcony railing with fingers that felt as if they might slip off the edge at any moment. You shouldn't be here, she said, though there was no true conviction in her voice. Kael's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. He stepped forward, his footsteps soft but assured, like a predator closing in on its prey. His eyes never left hers, studying her every move, every hesitation. And yet, he replied smoothly, you haven't asked me to leave. Selene's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what she was more afraid of, the fact that he was so close or the fact that she wasn't asking him to leave. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her ability to remain impervious to the entrapments of men like him. But now, with him standing before her, those walls were beginning to crumble. Kael's gaze was unwavering, and there was a weight to it, an expectation. He was daring her to respond, daring her to say something, anything, that would give him the final piece of her soul. Tell me, Selene, he said, his voice smooth, his words cutting deeper than a sword ever could. Does he ever ask you what you want? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. For the briefest moment, she didn't know what to say. Had she ever asked herself that? Had she ever been allowed to consider her own desires? He loves me, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Love, Kael echoed, his voice like a blade hidden beneath a velvet glove. A noble gauge. He took a step closer, and his hand rose to brush a strand of silver hair from her face. His fingers lingered for the briefest moment, though they did not leave her skin. There was something intoxicating about his touch, as if it held the promise of something far more dangerous than mere affection. When was the last time someone saw you a broken bar, not as a symbol, or a soldier, but as a woman? Clasped, his voice softer now, as if he were trying to peel back the layers of her soul. one painful strip at a time. Her breath hitched. Her pulse quickened. The question lodged itself deep within her chest, like a dagger buried just beneath the surface of her skin. She knew the answer. She had known it for a long time. "You're trying to break me," she said, her voice shaking with the weight of it. Kael leaned in, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered, "No, Selene. I'm showing you. You've already begun to break." His words hit her like a tidal wave, and in that moment, she realized something that made her skin crawl. She wasn't sure if she wanted to stop breaking. She wasn't sure if she was capable of fighting it anymore. Far to the east, in the war room of Everwind Citadel, Lucien Dawn stood at the strategy table, his eyes bloodshot, his mind consumed by the fires of vengeance. The table was scattered with maps and documents, but none of it mattered. None of it had ever mattered. The pieces of the puzzle were all there, but they didn't form the picture he wanted to see. Volthorn, lost. Edris, captured. Selene, silent. Lucien's fingers dug into the table's edge, his knuckles white from the strain. His breath came in short, angry bursts. His generals looked on, awaiting his command, but Lucien's thoughts were far from them. His eyes glazed over, seeing only Selene's face, her smile, her kiss, and now, her silence. "He has her," Lucien muttered, his voice a low, guttural growl. "He's trying to corrupt her." His gaze lifted, burning with a hatred so pure it could scorch the earth. He no longer saw his generals. He no longer saw the battlefield. He saw only Kael, the man who had taken everything from him, who had stolen the only thing that had ever mattered. Lucien's voice cracked with fury. "Kael will die. Even if I have to burn the world to reach him." One of his generals flinched. Another looked away. But Lucien didn't see them. He only saw the man who had stolen his world, and he was going to take it all back. "Prepare the army," he barked. "We march at dawn." But even as the words left his lips, Lucien knew why he wasn't leading as a hero anymore. He was chasing something far darker. He was chasing revenge. And Kael knew it. Back in Volthorn, Kael sat in his private chamber, reclining on a chair as dark as the shadows that swirled around him. He swirled a goblet of red wine, the liquid glistening in the dim light like the blood of prophecy itself. The fire crackled beside him, its flames casting strange,